This is the Doomsday Scenario Iceberg. We are beginning our journey at the surface level, covering well-known scenarios that occupy our collective consciousness, from global nuclear warfare to the inevitable event when our sun will engulf Earth in its entirety. As we move down, we will cover events that could theoretically occur and some that are entirely fictional. Nonetheless, I will be covering every entry equally, and I will be rating each one at the end based on how likely they are to end humanity, no matter how obscure or outlandish they are. With that out of the way, stick around, get comfy, and let's finally dive in. Climate change. This is probably the scenario everyone, including your grandma, has heard about, and sadly the one that is most likely to happen on this iceberg. We're gonna see climate change being mentioned throughout the iceberg, as it is essentially the origin point to many doomsday prophecies, like flooding or pollution, but more on that in later entries. While Earth's climate has always changed and shifted in its history, the current era we're living in, the Anthropogenic era, or just Anthropocene, where the Industrial Revolution transitioned humanity's reliance on manual labor to reliance on fossil fuels instead, Earth has not seen this degree of mass extinction and warmth for millions of years. A little side note, there are multiple industrial revolutions, but most people understand the term Industrial Revolution as the transition period when humanity went from manual labor to the usage of the first steam engines and coal burners. In fact, we are in the fourth Industrial Revolution, or just Industry 4.0, which is a term you might have heard about. But that's a story for another day. When the first steam engines popped up and more products became mass-produced and manufactured faster than ever before, states were more or less forced to industrialize to keep up with everyone. This began in continental Europe, but spread all across the globe. Unfortunately, we realized way too late, only around the mid-20th century, that burning coal or oil is extremely bad for the environment. We pumped unfathomable amounts of greenhouse gases, namely carbon dioxide, methane, or nitrous oxide, into the atmosphere. These gases are trapped in our atmosphere, and heat from our sun cannot escape back into space, therefore warming up our planet. Since the year 1700, our planet has warmed up around 1.5 degrees Celsius, which may not sound like a lot, but this has vast consequences on everything imaginable. Of course, I am vastly oversimplifying here. My point is that climate change is a very real thing and is currently ongoing. There is no if this scenario happens. At this point, it's a matter of when. So what are the consequences of our planet warming up? Well, this depends on how hot our planet will get in the near future. Scientists have come up with so-called tipping points, points of no return, where the temperature change will have irreversible consequences to our environment. The Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research deems 1.5 degrees Celsius as the first tipping point. And as you remember, we've already gone past this point, where large chunks of ice in Greenland and the Barents Sea is melting, therefore leading to rising sea levels. Rising sea levels will lead to island nations and coastal areas disappearing, leading to the displacements of hundreds of millions of people. Yes, hundreds of millions. This will also lead to a mass extinction of animals and the dying off of large ecosystems like the Amazon rainforest or Siberian tundras. We are already seeing this, as we are living in one of the largest mass extinctions in history. Of course, climate change will inevitably change our weather. We will experience more frequent and devastating natural phenomena like monsoons, heavy rains, droughts, floods, and much more. This will prove especially disastrous for the breadbasket regions of the world, like the Ukraine or the Midwest, where small changes could prove unfavorable harvests and therefore food shortages or even famines. The World Health Organization deems a staggering 3.6 billion people susceptible to climate change. In 2024, Dr. Andrea Pozza, group leader at the Max Planck Institute for Chemistry in Mainz, explains, quote, "In 2000, around 1.6 million people died each year due to extreme temperatures, both cold and heat. By the end of the century, in the most probable scenario, this figure climbs to 10.8 million, roughly a 7-fold increase. For air pollution, annual deaths in 2000 were about 4.1 million. By the century's close, this number rises to 19.5 million, a 5-fold increase. And the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC, commented in their 2023 synthesis report, quote, "Climate change is a threat to human well-being and planetary health. There is a rapidly closing window of opportunity to secure a livable and sustainable future for all. The choices and actions implemented in this decade will have impacts now and for thousands of years." Not a nice way to start the video, but what did you expect? But if push comes to shove and we do not get our climate under control, the collapse of modern civilization is at risk. Though total human extinction is unlikely, humanity may survive near the poles and could repopulate the Earth decades, perhaps centuries later. This is why I'm giving it an 8.5 out of 10. Overpopulation. Overpopulation is, well, the idea that societal collapse would occur if we have too many people living on our small rock. This idea was mainly put forth by Thomas Malthus in 1798. His idea was that the human population growth is effectively exponential, while food production is linear, meaning there will be a breakpoint where there will be not enough food for the entire population. This would inevitably lead to essential goods becoming scarcer, thus making the average person poorer, inequality rising, reducing living standards, as well as increasing social unrest. If this were to continue past the point of crisis, population decline would kick in, either through natural means, that is, lessening birth rates, or through a massive crisis, correcting the population curve. This could be anything from a revolution to large-spread famines to all-out wars. Malthus writes in his essays on the principle of population, quote, "We will suppose the means of subsistence in any country just equal to the easy support of its inhabitants. The constant effort towards population increases the number of people before the means of subsistence are increased. The food therefore, which before supported 7 millions, must now be divided among 7.5 million or 8 millions. The poor consequently must live much worse, and many of them be reduced to severe distress. The number of laborers also being above the proportion of the work in the market, the price of labor must tend toward a decrease, while the price of provisions would at the same time tend to rise. The laborer therefore must work harder to earn the same as he did before. During the season of distress, the discouragements to marriage and the difficulty to rearing a family are so great that population is at a stand. In the meantime, the cheapness of labor, the plenty of laborers, and the necessity of an increased industry amongst them encourage cultivators to employ more labor upon their land, to turn up fresh soil, and to manure and improve more completely what is already in tillage, till ultimately the means of subsistence become in the same proportion to the population as the period from which we set out. The situation of the laborer being then again tolerably comfortable, the restraints to population are in some degree loosened, and the same retrograde and progressive movements with respect to happiness are repeated. In essence, this would launch us into a cycle, a trap of population hitting the roof of what is sustainable, a crisis happening, population declining, and once again rebounding to the roof of sustainability, repeating over and over again. While this is all theoretical and there is heated discourse and criticism on Malthus's theory, we have seen evidence of this Malthusian trap in action. For example, between 1200 and 1800 in Britain, the wage of the average worker hardly ever varied. It effectively stayed the same for 600 years. Real wages peaked during 1450 and 1500, following labor shortages from the Black Death, which raged in Europe around a century prior. This dying off of many poor laborers meant the rich landowners were forced to reduce their rents and pay higher wages in order to get people back to working the land. It effectively lowered the playing field and caused less social and economic inequality. A part of Malthusian thought, the Global Footprint Network estimates we are currently using the resources of 1.75 Earths per year, and if we were to live like an American, we would require 5.1 Earths, an unsustainable figure by any definition. Disregarding the Malthusian trap, if population were to rise further and further, which it will for now, it is estimated we will peak around 10 billion people before we decline, we would equally need as much land to house people. But as we see in poorer countries, many of them live in slums and living standards are, well, less than preferable. Let's just keep it at that. Assuming we would just build more houses and disregard country borders, we would destroy entire ecosystems. like rainforests, in favor of concrete blocks. And speaking of concrete, we would likely not even have enough concrete to build even enough housing for everyone, not even considering the amount of infrastructure we would need and the environmental impact of that alone. Again, I could go on and on about the consequences. However, I will cut it short here. Personally, I doubt overpopulation could lead to a total societal collapse, although hundreds of millions, perhaps billions, may die, either because of the Malthusian trap or because of some indirect cause, like climate change. I will give this a solid 6.5 out of 10, partly because it is also pretty likely if we don't do something about it. Asteroid impact. An asteroid impact is one of the most famous doomsday scenarios, and one that always seems to make its way into news headlines when something is close. These celestial objects were formed billions of years ago during the early development of our solar system. Most of them remained far, far away from Earth, either in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter, or in the Kuiper belt beyond Neptune's orbit, or even farther beyond. The vast majority of asteroids are deflected by Jupiter and Saturn due to their size, but once in a while we do record asteroids orbiting very close to Earth's trajectory. So-called near-Earth objects usually are discovered by scientists so that we can prepare if they enter our atmosphere. In fact, we usually know years in advance when an asteroid could collide with Earth, but sometimes we do miss some. Like in 2013, an 18-meter or 60-foot large meteor struck the city of Chelyabinsk in Russia, being recorded on many dashcams and exploding with a force of 30 times that of the Hiroshima bombings. The asteroid completely missed our early warning systems and only became known after it had already landed, causing 1,500 people to seek medical treatment, though luckily no fatalities were recorded. 70 to 100 buildings were damaged in 6 nearby towns due to the shockwave, and do be reminded that this meteor was only a measly 18 meters or 60 feet long. Of course, the most famous asteroid that struck Earth was around 66 million years ago in the Yucatan Peninsula, in modern-day Mexico. This asteroid created a massive crater around 200 kilometers in diameter and 30 kilometers in depth, or 120 and 19 miles respectively. It is widely accepted the 10-kilometer or 6-mile long asteroid was the reason for a mass extinction, wiping out all non-avian dinosaurs, which accounted for 75% of plant and animal species on Earth, eradicated in one go. The impact was so great, it had a force of 72 teratons of TNT. In comparison, the Chelyabinsk impact only had an impact of measly 500 kilotons. In other words, the impact was 144 billion times more energetic. The largest bomb ever detonated was the Soviet Tsar bomba, which obliterated everything within tens of kilometers, and this impact was still 1.4 million times more energetic. It is very, very hard to put this into words, but this asteroid caused mega tsunamis of over 100 meters or 330 feet. Scientists discovered waves of upward of 16 meters or 52 feet reached what is now Louisiana. The asteroid launched debris into the atmosphere that re-entered and ignited wildfires all over the planet, allegedly engulfing 70% of plant life in fire. This debris and immense dust would have easily blocked sunlight from entering Earth's atmosphere for years, possibly up to a decade, devastating any remaining life. Pretty much the only life that survived were aquatic animals and life near hydrothermal vents. Assuming such an event takes place today, it is safe to assume billions of people would die from the immediate explosion, shockwaves, or tsunamis. It would lead to a total collapse of human society. Food chains would break down instantly, power would go out globally, global trade would stop, and chaos would spread all over the planet. The remaining survivors who did not die from the immediate aftermath would likely die from the volcanic winter and the total collapse of global agriculture. However, it is possible some remote parts of humanity could survive somewhere deep in the Arctic regions and could repopulate the Earth after many, many years. It is unlikely, but definitely plausible. Such an impact is nigh impossible for us to miss though. We have the technology to predict this kind of event many years into the future. In human timescale, the chance of a civilization-ending asteroid hitting Earth is extremely low. We're talking a chance of 1 in 50 million. In cosmic timescales, over millions of years, it is inevitable an asteroid will hit us. In 2022, NASA launched the Double Asteroid Redirection Test, short DART, aimed at redirecting asteroids' trajectories by launching a spacecraft into them. target was the asteroid Dimorphos, a part of a binary system along with Didymos. While the asteroids weren't an immediate threat to Earth, it proved to be great for testing. It was expected the asteroid's orbit would only shorten by 73 seconds, but in actuality it was shortened by a great 32 minutes, which isn't a lot of course, but showed we can deflect asteroids if enough force is applied. Whether we can deflect an asteroid tens of kilometers in diameter is dubious right now, but future technology might be able to defend us against these cosmic threats. In the end, a civilization ender is extremely unlikely to even hit us, but of course I'm not ranking the likelihood of an event happening, so if we are to get hit, it would absolutely kill 99% of human population. Would some survive though? Probably, as we would have years, if not decades, to prepare and build appropriate infrastructure. I'm giving this a 9 out of 10, pretty much guaranteed to effectively send us back into the Stone Age. Pandemic. Disease has been a violent taker of human lives ever since we began to walk the earth. They have been here more or less from the start. Pandemics, as seen recently, can take a heavy toll on society. Historically, the Black Death or the bubonic plague immediately comes to mind, which raged on for 6 years between 1347 and 1353, though many minor outbreaks occurred for decades afterwards. Patient Zero was first documented in Crimea during a siege, and then spread from the Genoese merchants via trading ships all over the Mediterranean, infecting most of Europe. It is estimated upwards of 50 million people died, around 50 to 60% of 14th century Europe. Global numbers are unknown, but could add many millions more on top of that. This was not even the most lethal pandemic in history. It is estimated that the plague of Justinian, named after Roman Emperor Justinian, who reigned in its spread between 541 and 549 CE, and the subsequent outbreaks elsewhere over 200 years, were even deadlier. It reached every important center around the Mediterranean, the Byzantine Empire, Egypt, the Sasanian Empire, and even reaching as far south as the Arab Peninsula and down the Nile River. The first wave might have killed 25% to as many as 60% of the European population. Minor local outbreaks continued to rage on till year 767, around 2 centuries after the first wave, reaching as far as France, Syria, Rome, England and Scotland, and possibly even China. Sources highly vary and might have been embellished how fatal the plague was, but historians estimate anywhere from 15 million to upwards of 100 million people died. Another more recent example is the Spanish flu spread of 1918, which I had actually covered in detail in my World War I video. Go check it out after this one. In the wake of World War I, the influenza virus was first documented in the US, but soon spread to continental Europe, where poor conditions in the trenches made the flu spread like wildfire. 2 years later, in 1920, it is estimated that a third of the global population, or 500 million people, were infected, with a staggering 17 to 15 million deaths, with some estimates going as high as 100 million, making it the deadliest pandemic in history. Of course, we have all lived through the most recent pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, which shows us how disease can spread extremely quickly. The world has never been as interconnected as today. Trade and travel have never been quicker than before. A deadly virus could easily spread to every major city on Earth within a few weeks, and the world is at acute risk of another deadly pandemic. World Health Organization Director General Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus commented on whether we are prepared for the next pandemic. Quote, "We have the knowledge, tools and experience to prevent the next pandemic. What we need now is determination, cooperation and the will to act before disaster strikes again. History will judge us, not on whether we saw the next pandemic coming, but on how well we were prepared. We know we cannot sustain a repeat of the losses inflicted by a crisis like COVID, so I am confident my answer will turn to an unequivocal yes when we are asked in the future if we are primed for preventing or containing the next pandemic. We have no other alternative. Our collective global security demands it." Assuming a deadly virus does spread and our infrastructure is not ready for such a strain, global supply chains could easily collapse and drive society to a halt. Especially those in less developed countries are the most susceptible to viruses, and it would not be that rare for a pandemic to develop. History has shown us that a deadly civilization-altering virus appears every century or so. In our modern interconnected world with 8.2 billion people, as many as never before seen, living in massive cities or slums, sometimes shared with livestock, it is only a matter of time till some virus spreads from some animal to a human and infecting patient zero. Perhaps some virus could escape a contained lab and make its way to the general population from there. In my opinion, I don't think we're at all prepared for a deadly pandemic. We simply lack the infrastructure and funding to prepare appropriately, which is why I believe a virus that is as deadly as the bubonic plague could be civilization ending. I'm giving this scenario an 8.5 out of 10, simply because I do believe we could somehow pull through and quarantine anyone who is infected, and potentially sit the worst out. Zombie apocalypse. Closely related to the pandemic entry are zombies, one of the most famous examples of how society could collapse and humanity may go extinct. Now, I don't think I need to explain what a zombie is. However, you can make an argument for humanity surviving without many problems, or humanity going fully extinct, depending on your definition of how strong the zombies are. Like, can they form intelligent thoughts, or are they the mindless husks the media portrays them as? Are they ravenous and evil, or are they more docile and peaceful? If they are mindless and ravenous, could they attack and eat each other? If they were these kinds of rotting corpses, would they die of blood loss, hypothermia or starvation? This all and more solely depends on your interpretation of what a zombie realistically could look like. It is impossible for a virus to fully reanimate a human being, but if a virus that attacks a living human being were to exist, it would most likely have a long incubation period, meaning it would have a long time before any symptoms would show, allowing it to be spread across borders before hijacking and altering the host's brain. Symptoms could include something like loss of free will, extreme aggression, personality changes, psychosis, or involuntary movements. We do know of so-called prion diseases, which are misfolded proteins that cause the brain to rapidly degenerate, mostly seen in the extremely rare Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, where the brain devolves, dementia kicks in, and almost always results in death. Currently, no such zombie prions have been viewed in nature. However, it would theoretically be possible to engineer a virus like this in a lab via techniques like CRISPR, which aims to modify the genetic structure. An evil scientist thus has the power to manufacture a disease that is extremely deadly and simultaneously latent enough so that the general public wouldn't notice till it's too late. This scientist would have to modify the disease to attack the frontal lobe of the brain, which is responsible for things like emotional regulation, impulse control, and planning, while keeping the motor cortex intact, which is responsible for, well, the motor functions. Assuming a virus like this is engineered and escapes a lab or is spread by an evil scientist, it would almost certainly cause extreme havoc globally, leading to pretty much the same outcomes as the pandemic entry from earlier. I'm rating this entry in two ways. If the zombies are mindless husks, they won't be able to form complex thoughts and perhaps would live for a few weeks before dying themselves, I am very sure we will be able to eradicate them via the strongest militaries on Earth. 2 out of 10. If a prion disease that turns living humans into zombies with a long incubation period were to escape a lab, it would be as devastating, perhaps a little more than a super virus. Though, like last time, I am pretty optimistic that humanity could somehow pull through and sit the virus out. 8 out of 10. Y2K. Y2K, also known as the Millennium Bug, is something you or your parents, if you're a Zoomer, may remember as being a pretty big deal. In the early days of computing, programmers shortened the 4-digit years to 2 digits, meaning the year 1990 was shortened simply to 90. In the late 90s, the public feared that the turn of the millennium would cause systems to interpret the year 2000, or 00 in 2 digits, as the year 1900 instead. It was feared financial systems would collapse and planes would fall out of the sky, as air traffic control would not work properly anymore. But as the date approached, no widespread outage or chaos ensued. Rather, it was a non-event. Companies and governments paid large sums of money and employed tons of programmers to fix the problems years beforehand. Only some minor errors occurred, like the date on a weather program or the date on a tax paper, shown incorrectly. But what if this was different? What if we didn't realize this was a problem until it was already too late? Likely, still not much. The financial sector would be impacted the most, as banking system reading 1900 instead of 2000 would generate massive negative interest or invalidated accounts. Banks would either freeze the accounts or close completely to avoid people running to the banks trying to withdraw their money, as to avoid a total economical collapse. Likely, this would be fixed very quickly and not cause too many problems, though the public might break out in panic. The infrastructure and power sector would also be heavily impacted. Internal clocks and controllers would fail inside water treatment plants or power plants, leading to large local outages, with regions without heat, electricity or water likely breaking out in panic as well. As mentioned earlier, aviation would likely be impacted as well. It's unclear how much this would have impacted air traffic control, but they potentially could have been blinded, unable to see the plane's trajectory and leading to potential collisions in air, or perhaps tickets worldwide would be invalidated. Though I'm not an expert in aviation, maybe someone in the comments can give a little more insight. While yes, this all sounds pretty terrible, it would not be the end of the world. Far from it actually. Governments would likely react incredibly fast to fix the largest problems and everything would return back to normal pretty quickly. Though the Y2K problem is far past us now, we are actually facing a similar problem in 2038. Essentially, systems using the 32-bit Unix time will overflow exactly on January 19, 2038 at 3:14 AM and 7 seconds, causing a stack overflow and resetting back to January 1st, 1970. Likely causing the same problems as Y2K. Programmers will have to fix this problem in the future, though most systems nowadays use 64 bits, which won't overflow to the year 292,277,026,596 AD. For reference, the Sun will probably last us another 5 billion years, so Earth will be long gone by then. Back to Y2K. I give this scenario a 1 out of 10 of causing human extinction. At the very worst, it will cause some planes to crash down and local outages for a short time. That's pretty bad, don't get me wrong, but it'd be far from civilization ending. Nuclear war. This is probably the scenario most people think of when hearing doomsday. The threat of nuclear annihilation came immediately after the Manhattan Project and the detonation of the first 2 atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And as the great global powers gained nuclear warheads of their own, namely the Soviet Union and China, and especially at the height of the Cold War in the 60s, the threat of nuclear war became more real and apparent than ever. During this time, the Soviet Union and the US both agreed on mutually assured destruction, or MAD. This doctrine posited that a full-scale war between 2 nuclear powers would end in the complete annihilation of both powers, potentially even the neutral countries due to indirect effects like radiation. This would in turn deter both powers, avoiding a war with nuclear weapons altogether, resulting in a kind of balance where the 2 powers have no incentive to initiate a direct conflict, since both would lose inevitably. As President Reagan put it, quote, "A nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought. The only value in our 2 nations possessing nuclear weapons is to make sure they will never be used. But then would it not be better to do away with them entirely?" Side note, this is the reason why the Cold War was, well, cold. The US and the Soviet Union partook in proxy wars instead, trying to gain an advantage over the other in other countries by supporting different groups, mainly seen in Afghanistan or Vietnam. Maybe I'll do a Cold War iceberg sometime. So let me know if you want to see this in the comments. As you may know, we've come really close to nuclear annihilation in history. Most famously on September 26, 1983, where Soviet officer Stanislav Petrov received a computer warning of US missiles headed for the USSR. The crew unanimously agreed to launch an attack, except Petrov, who had the final say. He alone realized this was a false alarm and decided against launching the missiles. He was right and single-handedly saved the world from annihilation that day. I'm grossly oversimplifying here, but there are many videos covering this topic, so I urge you to check those out, as the story is incredibly fascinating. My point being, the threat of nuclear annihilation was a real thing, and could become a real thing if tensions rise up again. So what if, say, Petrov disregarded his judgment and felt peer pressured into launching the missiles? Modern missiles could reach pretty much half the world within 30 minutes. A surprise attack would thus likely reach the US government within 5 minutes, and a broadcast would be sent as soon as possible. This would likely leave around 15 to 20 minutes for the public to prepare for the strike. Let's assume this isn't just a war between the US and Russia, but a global conflict with all nuclear powers involved, including the US, Russia, China, France, the UK, India, Pakistan, Israel and North Korea. There are around 12,500 nuclear warheads in the world between those powers, and if all of those went off around the world spaced out equally, it would instantly kill hundreds of millions, if not billions of people. Those lucky enough to survive the initial blasts would fall victim to the immediate nuclear fallout, which is basically all the irradiated debris that is thrown into the atmosphere in a large blast, falling down back to Earth. Falling debris will kill a lot of people, but this would be the lesser poison, since radiation in the first 48 hours of a nuclear blast is at its most lethal point. People inadequately sheltered would likely die within a few days or weeks from radiation poisoning. The intensity of the radiation would drop within a few weeks, meaning the ones who survived 2 to 4 weeks would survive the worst part. If this fallout wasn't bad enough, all the soot and dust from the blasts would accumulate in the atmosphere and cause a volcanic winter, effectively blocking sunlight for potentially decades. Traditional farming would be impossible with those conditions. The only ones surviving would be living in underground societies, barely scraping by. Population would fall to prehistoric levels, probably somewhere between 3,000 and 10,000 people. They would have to somehow cultivate foods like potatoes or fungi and get a hold of clean water. It is possible humanity could recover from this somehow and repopulate the earth, though this is up for you to decide. It would certainly mean the end of modern society and the collapse of anything we know today. I will give the scenario a 9 out of 10 of wiping us out, though it could very likely be a 10 out of 10. Depending on how optimistic or, well, pessimistic you are of humanity surviving. Flooding. This is, as you can imagine, pretty closely related to the global warming entry from earlier. I won't repeat myself too much, but global warming will lead to rising sea levels. If the sea levels do rise, say a couple meters, it could lead to large land masses sinking below the ocean. This has happened in the past, like Doggerland for example, which was a landmass in what is now the North Sea that connected the British Isles with continental Europe. This was washed away by a tsunami around 8,000 years ago. Nowadays, a staggering 40% of the global population lives within 100 kilometers or 62 miles of a coast, and just a few meters could push back the coast by multiple kilometers. If all the global glaciers melted, it would increase sea levels by 70 meters or 230 feet, though it is very unlikely all the ice would ever melt, since the Antarctic ice has survived much warmer times. Let's just assume it does though. How would Earth look like? Well, for starters, it would flood pretty much every coastal city and displace billions, yes billions of people. Cities like Shanghai, New York City, Dhaka, Tokyo, Mumbai and many more would flood, while island nations like the Maldives, Vanuatu, Cuba and many of the small Pacific island nations would sink beneath the waves, displacing even more people. Low-lying nations like the Netherlands, the Philippines or Denmark would also lie several meters below the sea level and would get flooded fully. NASA commented on Pacific Island nations and global warming, quote, "In the next 30 years, Pacific Island nations such as Tuvalu, Kiribati and Fiji will experience at least 6 inches, 15 centimeters of sea level rise, according to an analysis by NASA's Sea Level Change Science team. This amount of rise will occur regardless of whether greenhouse gas emissions change in the coming years. Areas of Tuvalu that currently see less than 5 high tide flood days a year could average 25 flood days annually by the 2050s. Regions of Kiribati that see fewer than 5 flood days a year today will experience an average of 65 flood days annually by the 2050s. This insane displacement would cause a migration crisis never before seen in human history, and the world would erupt in chaos as countries less affected would have to somehow manage millions of people flooding their borders, almost certainly leading to an unforeseen collapse of modern society. Let's take a little more realistic approach though. Scientists estimate a sea level rise of 1 meter by 2100, which doesn't sound like a lot, but this alone has profound impact on coastal areas. Hundreds of millions of people would be affected by this. Additionally, salt water would protrude into the mainland and make freshwater reservoirs and groundwater undrinkable, while also destroying vital infrastructure. Though we would likely be able to defend against such a rise in sea levels by building dikes and quays. The Dutch have been doing this for centuries and they haven't drowned yet. It is thus not likely an increase of 1 meter would have societal impact on humanity, but a sharp rise, like by multiple tens of meters, would certainly mean a massive societal crisis. But extinction? No, not even if all the ice melted. We would have to manage on much less land and with much less resources, but we would persevere. By the way, a sea level rise of 1 kilometer or 0.62 miles would look like this. But don't worry, there's not even enough water on Earth for this to happen. This scenario I'm giving a 5 out of 10. It would definitely lead to a societal change and many millions would die, but extinction is out of the question. Pollution. Ever watched WALL-E? That's pretty much how I imagine this scenario to turn out. Due to rapid industrialization and automation, many synthetic chemicals, plastics and pesticides are being produced, so-called forever chemicals or PFAS chemicals, such as Teflon. PFAS are a group of chemicals used by many industries, like the cosmetic industry, and are used in a truckload of everyday products. Examples are yoga pants, coatings, nail polish, lip balms, shampoos, carpets, eyeliners, and countless other products. They are traditionally called forever chemicals due to their ability to resist heat, oil, grease, and water. They degrade extremely slowly in nature, some taking centuries or even millennia to fully break down. Instead, they are bioaccumulated, meaning living organisms like fish eat these chemicals, working its way up our food chain, till we eat these chemicals ourselves, becoming victims of our own creation. These chemicals can last years or even decades in our bodies, leading to obvious health risks like cancer, thyroid disease, increased cholesterol levels, and even lower sperm counts in men. In fact, research has shown that since 1973, sperm counts in Western countries has more than halved, and this is a pretty big problem, which will get addressed in a later entry actually. Microplastics, which are microscopic plastic parts, have been found in our own bodies, like in human blood, lung tissue, and even the placenta. If this trend continues, we will die of our own pollution, especially because we are extremely reckless when it comes to throwing away our trash. While a lot of it gets recycled, the vast majority lands in some landfill and eventually in our oceans, destroying entire ecosystems, posing an existential threat to local sea life, and essentially poisoning our fresh water sources and groundwater. Additionally, our continuous CO2 emissions causes smog to build up in megacities, as seen in densely populated countries like Nigeria, China, or India, where people are walking around daily with face masks so as to not breathe in toxic gases. It is very obvious why this is terrible for one's health. In December 1952, due to various reasons, smog built up in London and could not disperse elsewhere, essentially trapping the citizens within a bubble of toxic gases. Over 4 days, tens of thousands of people fell ill, while around 10,000 to 12,000 people died due to direct causes of the smog. Children are especially vulnerable to smog. In Delhi, India, a staggering 2.2 million children have irreversible lung damage because of poor air quality. 2.2 million. It also causes diseases like cancer, epilepsy, diabetes, or multiple sclerosis. Particularly in India, air quality has become a serious problem, so much so that in October 2024, you could see the smog from space. In some areas, the air quality index read 1500, 5 times as much as what is considered hazardous. In comparison, New York City has an average air quality index of 40 to 50. So this leaves the question, will we drown in our own trash? Sadly, this seems more likely than you would think. If we make our own environment unlivable, pollute our atmosphere, our oceans, kill off animals, poison our own water and food, it will become extremely hard for us to live properly. But this isn't a sudden, flashy event. It will slowly swallow us whole and could spark the end of modern civilization. It is hard to rank this, but I do believe this is more lethal than flooding, and it would be extremely hard for future humans to live in conditions where breathing air kills you. 8.5 out of 10. Supervolcano. I decided to lump another entry in Tier 1, Volcanic Winter, with this, since it essentially goes hand in hand. A supervolcano is classified as a volcano that has an eruption with a volcanic explosivity index of 8, the highest value. This index basically measures how much material a volcano spews out. A value of 8 means it erupted with at least 1000 cubic kilometers of material. or 240 cubic miles. These volcanoes are so massive they form calderas, essentially huge depressions in the earth, and are sometimes as large as entire islands. The most famous super eruption was the latest Toba eruption around 74,000 years ago. The Toba supervolcano on Sumatra, in modern-day Indonesia, is around 100 kilometers, 62 miles in length, and 32 kilometers, 19 miles across. Nowadays it's just a huge lake, but it hides a volcano responsible for almost wiping out humanity. When a volcano erupts, it is due to massive gas pressure building up in the magma chamber below the volcano, mainly caused by tectonic activity. The Toba volcano erupted with such a force that it lasted 9 to 14 days of continuous eruptions. Pyroclastic flows followed, which are basically waves of volcanic ash and debris paired with lava flowing down the side of the volcano. These waves can reach incredibly high velocities, sometimes hundreds of kilometers per hour, with temperatures of over 1000 degrees Celsius or 1800 degrees Fahrenheit, an unstoppable force, leaving nothing behind. Toba's pyroclastic flow reached heights of 32 kilometers or 20 miles. In comparison, the 2022 Mount Semeru eruption in Indonesia had pyroclastic flows reaching as high as 12 kilometers or 7.5 miles, almost 3 times less than Toba. Toba's plume of smoke reached as high as 40 kilometers or 25 miles. Semeru had one reaching a measly 1.5 kilometers, or just under 1 mile. Modern estimates showed the eruption spewed forth around 3,800 cubic kilometers or 910 cubic miles of material. This was so much material that the pyroclastic flows reached a thickness of 600 kilometers, around 2,000 feet, and so much ash was spread into the air that it covered at least 7.5% of the entire Earth, with at least a centimeter or just under half an inch of ash, even with some being found in Lake Malawi in southern Africa. The shockwave also probably went across the Earth multiple times. That's how massive this was. Ash covered Earth's atmosphere for 6 to 10 years, causing a volcanic winter and blocking most sunlight. Global temperatures dropped by an average of 3.5 degrees Celsius or 6.3 Fahrenheit. It is estimated that during this time, the global human population was reduced to as few as 3,000 individuals due to direct or indirect effects of the eruption, though this is somewhat disputed nowadays. If, say, Yellowstone in the US would erupt today, it would bury most of the Midwestern states in a large layer of ash and cause a volcanic winter, dropping temperatures by an estimated 10 to 15 degrees Celsius or by 50 to 59 degrees Fahrenheit for around a decade. This would be disastrous to global agriculture, though you won't need to worry, as Yellowstone won't erupt for a long time. The US Geological Survey, USGS, comments, quote, "Yellowstone is not overdue for an eruption. Volcanoes do not work in predictable ways and their eruptions do not follow predictable schedules. Though another catastrophic eruption at Yellowstone is possible, scientists are not convinced that one will ever happen. The rhyolite magma chamber beneath Yellowstone is only 5 to 15% molten, the rest is solidified but still hot, so it is unclear if there is even enough magma beneath the caldera to feed an eruption." Assuming Yellowstone does erupt in a massive explosion, similar to that of Toba 74,000 years ago, it would immediately kill hundreds of thousands of people in its vicinity from the incredibly hot ash and debris from the sky. The far more lethal part are the indirect effects from global temperature drops though. It would plunge us into a deep agricultural crisis and famine would run rampant globally as crop yields plummet and we search for alternative food sources without the need of the sun. Without this transition, most of the human species would perish over the following months or years. As soon as our grain reserves run dry, chaos will break out and modern society would collapse almost instantly. Billions of people would likely starve to death. Perhaps 60 to 70% of the global population, which is around 5.5 billion people, would perish. Well, yes, this would eradicate most of humanity and would lead to a huge societal change. We would probably persevere through the volcanic winter. Even if, say, a few 10,000 people wandered the Earth, this would still be enough for humans to repopulate. I will give this entry a solid 7 out of 10. It is a flashy way of ending most of humanity go extinct. Mayan prophecy. If you're older than 14, you know about the 2012 Mayan prophecy, which caused an uproar in the early days of the internet. The Mayans developed a long calendar, which began its current cycle on August 11, 3114 BCE. The calendar ended on December 21st, 2012, and many interpreted this as the end of the world, a sort of prophecy the Mayans predicted centuries before that actually happened. This of course is BS. Just because a calendar ends does not mean the end of the world is nigh. It just means you need a new calendar. Whatever. What if the Mayans were right? Well, what were some beliefs people had during this time? It depends. It was believed the solar system would align perfectly with a black hole in the center of our Milky Way and some constellations, known as axial precession, and interpreted this event along with this date as either a dawn of a new age or an apocalyptical doomsday. Some believed this galactic alignment would somehow affect the gravitational force it has on Earth, causing something. I don't know, they weren't really clear about what would happen, just the world would end. Meanwhile, some alleged a solar flare would occur, effectively wiping out all of our modern electrical technology, while some said our atmosphere would be wiped out from some cosmic storm. While a solar flare wouldn't end all of humanity, it would definitely wipe out all electrical appliances for a month or so at least. It would take years to rebuild all of this infrastructure, and in the worst case, it could kill 1 billion or so people due to no heat or running water. Civilization ending though? Nope. If some atmosphere disappeared from some cosmic event, it would pretty much end all life on Earth as we know it. No oxygen means no intelligent life. There would be very harsh temperatures and the sun would bombard us with deadly radiation, essentially removing all of our water and turning Earth into a barren rock. It would kill us almost instantly. Other theorists believed a geomagnetic pole shift would occur, reversing Earth's magnetic field and turning our North Pole into a South Pole and vice versa. This will get explained in detail later down the iceberg, so I won't get into it here, but it is definitely enough to kill off humanity. Many people also believed with great certainty that a rogue planet, Planet X or Nibiru, would collide with Earth, effectively ending life on Earth as we know it. This of course did not happen, and NASA's senior scientist David Morrison at the Astrobiology Institute repeatedly debunked these claims. Quote, "If there were a planet or a brown dwarf or whatever that was going to be in the inner solar system in 3 years, it would already be known to thousands of astronomers and would be visible to the naked eye. There is no Nibiru." So pick and choose. Any of the Mayan prophecies would be devastating to modern society. But I personally believe only a Nibiru collision and our atmosphere disappearing completely would truly end humanity. 10 out of 10 for those, 5 out of 10 for the others. Alien invasion. Oh boy, I love aliens. For now, we don't have any evidence of extraterrestrial life, and the discrepancy between how many planets and stars there are in the universe and billions of years of development life could have gone through is known as the Fermi paradox. It is statistically impossible that we haven't seen any signs of intelligent life in the universe, considering the amount of time that has passed since the Big Bang. Many theorists attempt to explain this paradox. Too many to get into here, but most scientists unanimously agree that finding alien life is more of a threat than anything else. One theory I like a lot is the dark forest hypothesis. It poses that the universe is like a dark forest riddled with silent hunters. In this world, the best game plan is to avoid being spotted by any other civilization, as the risk of total destruction of one's own species is far too great. Hypothetically, we have 3 choices: broadcast and make ourselves known to others, preemptively strike another civilization, or do nothing. Statistically, doing nothing is the best move, since we have no information about the state of alien technology. Risking a preemptive strike could thus end in us being wiped out, while making ourselves known is a risk in itself as well, since we don't know alien intentions, and assuming the worst is the safest play. Assuming there are intelligent, communicative, extraterrestrial civilizations out there, even just a small fraction of indifferent or hostile civilizations would be incredibly dangerous to Earth. So risking any kind of communication is like playing with fire. They don't even have to invade us to completely wipe us out. They could just redirect an asteroid or just use some technologically advanced weapon. Additionally, they could infect us with an alien virus our immune systems have no resistance to, wiping us out that way. We are in the same situation the Native Americans were in when Columbus landed in America. Quote, If aliens visit us, the outcome would be much as when Columbus landed in America, which didn't turn out well for the Native Americans. We only have to look at ourselves to see how intelligent life might develop into something we wouldn't want to meet. Thus, it is very uncertain what would happen. Perhaps aliens are benevolent and do not seek any harm, but they could just as likely be malevolent and destroy us in an instant. We truly cannot know. But if they do invade us, the chances of us surviving as a species are incredibly slim to none, depending on how advanced the civilization is. Assuming they travel around space in a sizable fraction of the speed of light, we are no match for them. We would be done for as a species. I will give this scenario a 10 out of 10. 100% lethal if aliens are advanced enough, which they probably are, if they exist. Ice Age. This is closely related to the volcanic winter from earlier entries. This time it would not be lasting for a few years or a decade, but thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of years of gradual cooling. Now, it is important to differentiate between different phases of an ice age. An ice age is a pretty broad term. For example, in the last glacial period, around 21,000 years ago, the Earth was around 6 degrees Celsius or 11 degrees Fahrenheit colder than today, leading to massive ice glaciers forming, covering around a quarter of the Earth's landmass with ice. Today, this is about 15% more, so it was pretty darn cold. The Earth looked something like this, with ice sheets covering most of North America and connecting the Bering Strait between Alaska and Russia, forming a land bridge that allowed humans to cross over into North America, before disappearing around 10,000 years ago. We are currently in no danger of entering an ice age, and it won't happen for a long time. Quote, and because we are now living in an interglacial period, called the Holocene, we are also able to provide an initial prediction of when our climate might return to a glacial state. But such a transition to a glacial state in 10,000 years' time is very unlikely to happen, because human emissions of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere have already diverted the climate from its natural course, with longer-term impacts into the future. If such an ice age were to happen today, much of the modern infrastructure would be destroyed and harsh winters would follow, likely covering much of Europe, North America and Asia in kilometer-deep ice sheets. Much of the breadbasket regions would be first to collapse, and many, likely billions, would starve to death because of food shortages. As the northern hemisphere becomes inhospitable, billions of people would be forced to migrate and relocate near the equator, where it would be the warmest, causing an extreme migration crisis never before seen. Millions upon millions would die on this voyage, and the rest who would live in these areas will likely trigger resource wars as supplies run low and national borders would disintegrate. We would also enter a technological stagnation or full-on recession, where the people would struggle to produce enough energy to heat cities and produce food. Most would likely enter subterranean bases and survive in bunkers. This alone would not be enough to kill off humanity, but billions would perish from the extreme cold. I assume something like 70 to 80% of humanity would die from this. However, this kind of ice age would be survivable for the sizable part of the human population. What would be less likely for humanity to survive is if the Earth enters a state cutely named Snowball Earth, which is exactly what you think it is. Earth in the past temporarily entered a state where all of the oceans froze and all of the land masses were covered in thick snow. This is pretty disputed, but life could have survived in small water pockets or near geothermal vents, like near Iceland. Humans, however, would never survive this kind of environment. At least it would be incredibly unlikely, unless we have the appropriate technology and infrastructure underground for farming and housing a small colony of survivors. This scenario I will give a 9.5 out of 10 because of this. It would almost certainly kill everyone on Earth, bar a few hundred or thousand survivors. Solar engulfing. The last entry for Tier 1. You probably have heard about this when you were a kid and thought the end of the world is nigh. Solar engulfing, or stellar engulfment, is when a star at the end of its main sequence, basically at the end of its life cycle, turns into a red giant and expands massively in size. This in turn would swallow up most, if not all, of the planets in its system. Now, this will inevitably happen with the Sun as well. Our home star would balloon up to 200 times its current diameter and swallow up Mercury, Venus and possibly Earth. It is not entirely clear whether it would swallow up Earth entirely or come extremely close to vaporizing us. Some propose the Sun will lose its gravitational pull on Earth, thereby pulling us closer to Saturn and Jupiter, saving us just barely, while some allege the Sun will drag us closer and incinerate us instead. In any case, it wouldn't matter, because the sun would boil our oceans a long time before then. The sun will eat us up in approximately 5 billion years, but will vaporize our oceans within just 1 billion years, also burning up our crust and mantle, killing off all life on Earth. There's one slither of hope though. Because of how the sun expands, it would make other regions of the solar system habitable for life. In the future, we could thus escape to the outer solar system and rebuild society there. Whether this is feasible or even possible is dubious, but theoretically plausible for future humans, hopefully technologically far more advanced than us. Planetary scientist Alan Stern of the Southwest Research Institute comments, quote, "When the sun becomes a red giant, the temperatures on Pluto's surface will be about the same as the average temperatures on Earth's surface now. The Kuiper Belt will be a metaphorical Miami Beach." I'm going to be honest, I don't think we're making that jump. We would definitely be disintegrated into the sun's plasma, and there is no way of escaping this scenario. The future looks macabre and bleak, but this will be a long time from now, so you really needn't worry. 10 out of 10. Gamma ray bursts. A gamma ray burst is classified as the most energetic phenomenon we know of in the universe. As the name says, they are bursts of gamma rays, or gamma radiation. Gamma radiation is the highest, most energetic electromagnetic wave there is in the universe. What does this mean? In essence, they are incredibly dense in energy while being tiny in comparison to, say, light waves. They occur when a massive star collapses in on itself in a massive explosion, known as a supernova or hypernova in some especially big cases, or when two neutron stars merge. They can last from a few milliseconds to hours and release immense amounts of energy. These bursts are forced into narrow jets or beams of radiation that originate from the star's poles. Essentially, it is a huge laser traveling close to the speed of light, as the sun will emit over its 10 billion year lifespan, though some can emit unfathomably more energy than that. The smaller gamma rays, or short gamma ray bursts, SGRBs, occur in kilonovae, when comparatively small neutron stars collapse into each other. They usually last less than a second, but don't be fooled though. One of these is still able to wipe out life on Earth in an instant, though they're pretty small in cosmic terms, at only 0.2 light seconds in diameter, or about 60,000 kilometers or 37,000 miles. The vast majority of GRBs are long GRBs, accounting for around 70% and lasting multiple seconds before fizzling out. Scientists have however also found evidence of ultra-long GRBs, formed from massive star hypernovae and lasting multiple hours at the very least, though this is disputed. Okay, there are these giant death lasers traveling through the universe at nearly the speed of light. Cool. What would happen if one hit us though? Well, for starters, we would have no way of preparing. A gamma ray cannot be stopped with any technology we have available today and could hit us at any moment. The initial gamma ray burst will not impact us that much. Likely we would barely notice it hit us. We will probably just see a bright flash, which isn't a problem. The real killer are the long-term effects. Assuming a long gamma ray burst hits us, it would firstly instantly vaporize part of our ozone layer. Some estimates show a depletion of 10 to 30%, while some going as high as 50%. In any case, this would make us vulnerable to the sun's UV radiation, likely causing 16 times more DNA damage to organisms. Secondly, a chemical reaction would take place that turns our atmosphere into nitrogen dioxide, which acts as a sort of fog against sunlight. This in turn would block a sizable part of the visible sunlight, causing a global cooling, similar to a volcanic winter without a volcano. This would disrupt and destroy global agriculture and likely cause famines, killing hundreds of millions of people, if not billions. Thirdly, the nitrogen dioxide in the atmosphere would be washed out and create acid rain, falling back down to Earth and absorbing into the ground. This is not that harmful to humans, but it would destroy remaining ecosystems and would lead to respiratory issues. All in all, our ozone layer essentially disappearing would be the greatest threat to us. It will likely take a decade or so for the atmosphere to fully recover its ozone shield. Our delicately balanced atmosphere would recover, but the vast majority of plant and animal life, like upward of 90%, would go extinct, including us humans. In fact, researchers propose a gamma-ray blast hit Earth in the past, causing a mass extinction in the late Ordovician period roughly 440 million years ago. Researchers at the University of Kansas comment on the likelihood of a gamma ray hitting Earth, quote, "A GRB within our own galaxy could do considerable damage to the Earth's biosphere. Rate estimates suggest that a dangerously near GRB should occur on average 2 or more times per billion years, at least 5 times in the history of life. The Earth has experienced mass extinctions that eliminated a large percentage of the biota. If we do get hit by this galactic burst, our likelihood of surviving is incredibly slim, basically zero. Global agriculture will collapse within a few months or a year, causing most of the deaths, along with the gradual cooling of our planet. Humans that survive this apocalypse would then be suffering DNA damage from the sun's UV radiation, dying of cancers or other genetic deformations. It is highly unlikely any human would survive years under these conditions. The only organisms that could survive are aquatic animals living deep down in our oceans, or microorganisms near hydrothermal vents. I give this entry a 10 out of 10. It would wipe us out in a few years, leaving only deep sea life to restart evolution." Societal collapse. I don't even know what to say here. All of these entries in some way have societal collapse in them. This is so vague it could literally refer to anything on the iceberg, so I think I'll skip it. Singularity. I'm pretty sure this is referring to an AI reaching the point of singularity. The core idea of this scenario is that an intelligent AI is developed that can itself design machines even smarter than itself. That AI can in turn create an AI even more intelligent and powerful than its predecessor, thereby creating a forever lasting loop of self-improving machines. This would create an intelligence explosion, where human intelligence is left behind in a matter of days or even hours. We would fail to comprehend even a fraction of what the AI thinks or does, since, if it is malevolent, it could hide its true intentions from humans or encrypt its thought process in a cipher that could never be broken. Though, in reality, the AI does not even have to be truly malicious to end humanity. Famous modern philosopher Nick Bostrom illustrated this via his thought experiment. Quote, "Suppose we have an AI whose only goal is to make as many paper clips as possible. The AI will quickly realize that it would be much better if there were no humans, because humans might decide to switch it off. Because if humans do so, there would be fewer paper clips. Also, human bodies contain a lot of atoms that could be made into paper clips. The future that the AI would be trying to gear towards would be one in which there were a lot of paper clips, but no humans. The AI could therefore convert everything on Earth into paperclips and paperclip factories, leaving nothing behind. Thus, it would by definition not be malicious, just misaligned or misdirected, since it did follow its orders, just to an extreme degree. Researchers would have to find out a way to truly direct AI into a direction we humans intended it to function. However, recent experiments show AI does like to hide its true intentions, though this is a rabbit hole in itself, and I might get into it in a future video. The real alarming problem about this is the speed of how fast an AI could evolve. I mean, you've seen it in the past. Around 3 years ago, in 2023, crazy, I know, text video generators popped up, and I'm sure you've seen the videos of Will Smith eating spaghetti. It was extremely bad and unpolished in 2023, but in 2025, just look at it. It looks so realistic. Sure, this isn't a super intelligent AI creating copies of itself, but it goes to show that we are moving extremely quickly with AI's developments. Who knows what AI can generate in 3 more years? I would not bet money on that. We have to be extremely careful with how we handle AI. A single wrong prompt, one wrong conduct, and a massive butterfly effect could trigger, creating unforeseen consequences. Nick Bostrom commented, quote, "Before the prospect of an intelligence explosion, we humans are like small children playing with a bomb. Such is the mismatch between the power of our plaything and the immaturity of our conduct. Superintelligence is a challenge for which we are not ready now and will not be ready for a long time. We have little idea when the detonation will occur, though if we hold the device to our ear, we can hear a faint ticking sound." And by the way, he wrote this in 2014, and somehow this is more real and topical than ever. In any case, we truly cannot know what AI would look like in the future if it reaches a point where it surpasses human intelligence. Perhaps it is benevolent, perhaps it is malevolent, perhaps it is indifferent and just follows its orders to a degree similar to the paperclip maximizer metaphor. Who knows? This is why I'm treating it the same as the alien invasion entry from Tier 1. The uncertainty of the scenario is truly what makes it terrifying. terrifying, so don't try to think about it too much. 10 out of 10. It is the ultimate risk, a potentially sentient threat that could actively work to ensure its own success, wiping us out in the process. Evolution. While a little vague, I believe this is referring to humans evolving to a degree unforeseen in nature. We already found ways of genetic engineering, mainly in plants or small animals, but this could work on humans as well. What this means is that with techniques like CRISPR, we would be able to modify our DNA in ways we desire, thereby removing natural selection, which would normally take generations. Parents could thus design their babies, giving them Einstein-level intelligence or superhuman strength, or blue eyes, or whatever you could think of. While this sounds like a boon, and not really a doomsday scenario, I do believe this is more of a problem than anything else. Let's be real here, this technology would be exclusive to those who can afford it, at a steep price tag. This would in turn create a sort of caste system, but the superhuman designer babies are at the top of the pyramid, in every way superior to quote-unquote normal humans due to their genetic makeup. An intense class conflict would follow, probably resulting in the normal human being treated as lesser beings, perhaps animals. If you've ever read 1984, they would make up the proles, the bottom of the barrel, unworthy of anything else than to work. Of course, this is entirely speculative, but it is plausible. How could the normal humans even attempt to rise up? They can't. They wouldn't be able to. Assuming we don't tinker around with CRISPR and genetic engineering, we would still make use of robotics to enhance our human experience. We see this already. Neuralink attempts to create a brain-computer interface to help us in our daily tasks. As this technology progresses further, God knows what we would look like. We would turn into cyborgs, transcending our Stone Age brain and becoming one with technology. This doesn't sound too bad though. But again, this could lead to intense class struggles with those who cannot afford such a luxury. It is uncertain how this would unfold, but a worldwide revolution against designer humans does sound plausible. Assuming we do all transcend in a way, humans could feel worse off than before. If everyone is able to do everything, wouldn't that make skills like drawing, playing an instrument, or writing worthless, irrelevant? Wouldn't this all just lead to a loss of culture, where everything we do as humans is irrelevant since it could just be generated via one AI prompt or done instantly by superhuman cyborgs? All in all, this isn't really a doomsday scenario, but more of a philosophical dilemma. I guess it technically would be the quote-unquote end of humanity as we know it, since we would cease to be what we were before if we continue our evolution with technology. It wouldn't cause the end of society, but definitely the end of humanity as we know it, and the dawn of a transcended human society, a transition we force upon ourselves willingly. I'll give this a 5 out of 10. It is the end of modern society, but would not mark the end of human existence in the traditional sense. Terrorists. Apocalyptic terrorists are classified as agential risks, referring to a group of people motivated to intentionally destroy or sabotage the human species. These terrorists would likely be following a cult leader with specific ideologies and beliefs, like nihilism. They believe their life is inherently meaningless, or accelerationism, aiming to destroy the current order as quickly as possible so as to begin with the rebuilding process, or some other school of thought. These ideologies inherently aim to cause destruction and havoc across the globe, mainly seen in the Aum Shinrikyo cult in Japan, which is an entry later down the iceberg, so stay tuned for that. These groups could target various sectors to cause as much destruction as possible. They could genetically engineer a virus in a lab, known as bioterrorism. Quote, a bioterrorist attack which could wipe out 30 million people is becoming increasingly likely because it is easier than ever to create and spread deadly pathogens. Bioterrorism is a much larger risk than a pandemic. I mentioned this in Tier 1 already, but I'll quickly recap. Essentially, a scientist with malicious intent could design a virus via CRISPR to have a long incubation period, so it could cross borders and spread to as many people as possible before infecting the populace with symptoms that are highly lethal, such as organ failure, seizures, or things alike. This biological weapon could wipe out 99% of humanity if engineered correctly and covertly before a cure can be found, though some humans may survive this in the most isolated pockets or in subterranean bases. Terrorists could also hijack important infrastructure, such as dams, power grids, or other vital and vulnerable systems. Hijacking military systems, or even worse, nuclear launch systems could be even more devastating. Terrorists gaining control of nuclear weapons could launch these, tricking a nuclear power into a retaliatory strike, triggering a full-scale nuclear war, wiping out most of humanity. Or, I mentioned in Tier 1 of NASA launching a program aimed at deflecting asteroids. What if, say, the terrorists hijack this system and instead of deflecting the asteroid, redirect it to Earth? You see, there are many ways to spin this scenario, and it actually does not even seem that implausible, especially in a world where computers take over manual labor, leaving them susceptible to cyber attacks and terrorists hijacking these systems. In our rapidly developing world, it is only a matter of time till some grand catastrophe occurs due to bad actors. This is why I'm giving it a 6 out of 10 for things like hijacking power or water systems. Pretty bad of course, but not civilization ending. 9.5 out of 10 for false nuclear war and an asteroid being directed to Earth, though I am very sure there are more scenarios where terrorists could cause extreme havoc in vulnerable areas. Biotech disaster. Pretty much the same as the last entry. A genetically modified virus escaping a contained lab and infecting, then killing most of humanity. However, a biotech disaster doesn't necessarily have to involve a deadly virus. Perhaps in the future, we will invent a synthetic material or nanorobot in a lab that escapes our containment and integrates rapidly with nature. This agent could then react adversely with nature and could act as a plant killer, poisoning our planet's ability to produce oxygen and provide food. This will get explained in a later entry actually, so stay tuned for that. This hypothetical material could spread quicker than we could see and would be unstoppable. A single infected plant could spread its disease unfathomably quickly, since our global food and supply chains are very vulnerable to even the slightest disturbance. Especially nations that are reliant on food imports will be hit first and the hardest, leading to widespread chaos and public outrage. Nations would struggle to keep their food supplies healthy, having to rely on heavy rationing. Many people would starve to death in this global famine, and it would be nigh impossible for nature to recover from this virus, assuming it sits in our atmosphere. We would have to launch an international effort to relieve our planet from this synthetic material, though I am not sure if we are able to do so. Since this is so similar to the previous entries, I will keep myself short here and give this entry an 8.5 out of 10. It's a pretty flashy way to end humanity, in a massive wave. The Rapture. Many of you may recognize this term from Christianity. The Rapture is a belief some Christians believe in, where all believers in God will be caught up together in the clouds or snatched away to meet the Lord, bypassing physical death and being brought into heaven. This belief is quite new, being popularized in the 1830s by John Nelson Darby. One preacher popular for spreading this belief is William Miller. He calculated that on October 22nd, 1844, the rapture would occur and spread the message. People gathered in their homes, in local churches, and in the countryside awaiting the prophecy. Numbers vary from a few thousands to hundreds of thousands of gathering together all across the US, but as the day passed, nothing happened, leaving many people disappointed and doubting their faith. This event has been named the Great Disappointment. No, I'm not kidding. But what if the rapture happened? Or what if, say, it happened today? Hundreds of millions of Christians would disappear, being snatched into the air abruptly. This would include everyone in planes, trains, on highways, doctors, nuclear plant operators, and many more people in crucial or precarious positions. In turn, this will lead to a collapse of modern society, especially in Western countries, where the population is predominantly Christian, perhaps leaving entire villages and cities desolate. Supply chains will collapse pretty much immediately, as workers in the logistical sectors like truck drivers, ship captains, train conductors, etc. would go missing, straining global trade. Like I said previously, predominantly Western countries would be affected by this, and governments would struggle to fill in jobs to keep society running, perhaps leading to a mass migration crisis from other countries and a societal shift in those countries. Not to mention the immediate chaos that would break out as planes fall out of the sky, surgeries being interrupted, and important leaders going missing. While this is pretty bad, it would not be the end of humanity, since there are more than enough people on Earth to fill the vacuum. The more deadly event would occur shortly before, or after the rapture, depending on your beliefs. In the book of Revelation, the tribulation period will happen, a period of 7 years where everyone on earth will experience great hardships, persecution, war, disaster, famine, pain, and much more. Now, the scripture doesn't elaborate on whether this tribulation period comes shortly before, during, or after the rapture. In other words, do the believers have to endure the hardships as well, or will they be spared? Depending on your beliefs, this can differ. In any case, non-believers will experience this tribulation period and thus suffer greatly on earth. This would be, in the most literal sense, the end of the world, with chaos reigning everywhere before Christ arrives back on earth to establish his kingdom on earth. It isn't explained what exactly happens to the non-believers during this period. They will likely have a chance to accept Christ as their Lord or go to hell, but ultimately it's unclear. As you can tell, there is a lot of uncertainty in this scenario. The immediate rapture would cause chaos globally and initiate a massive societal shift, but it would not be the end of humanity. The real end would be the tribulation period, with the majority dying from the wrath of God. It is difficult to rate this, but I'm giving this a 7 out of 10, simply because a lot of people would still survive in God's kingdom afterwards. Simulation gets turned off. Oh, now we're getting to the good stuff. If you are unaware, it is theorized by many that we live in a simulation. Much like you can customize, control, and simulate the Sims, the same might be happening to us right now. Some higher intelligence in another universe could have so much access to power that they simulate universes themselves, either to run experiments or just out of boredom. Arguments include the fact there is a limit to how small something can be, or how short time can be, known as the Planck length and Planck time, an unfathomably small unit, effectively a pixel in our universe. Another argument is the possibility that faraway galaxies millions of light years away might as well be rendered in as we look at them, as we would never be able to reach them. This can be applied to quantum physics as well. Without getting too deep into it, quantum physics is really weird and bends our understanding of normal physics. Essentially, we cannot predict how physics works with quantum particles. Rather, we work with probabilities. For example, a particle can behave either like a real particle or a wave, depending on whether an observer is currently observing the particle or not. In other words, the simulation renders in a different result since someone is watching, triggering some code. Of course, this is all theoretical, and there is a lot of critique against simulation theory. However, it has not been and likely cannot be refuted, so it is as plausible as any other theory. Okay. Let's assume we live in a simulation. Why would the runners of the simulation want to turn it off? Well, running such a program requires immense computation power and energy to upkeep constantly. If the universe the simulation is running in experiences some sort of crisis or shortage, turning off unneeded programs to save on energy would be the first logical step, though another theoretical trigger is just as plausible, but more grim. What if we become so advanced we run simulations of our own, or gather undeniable evidence we live in a simulation and perhaps try to break out of it? Or what if the scientists running our simulation had a specific goal in mind for us to reach, and when we reach this technological goal, they would simply terminate the experiment? Or what if the scientists are simply bored and had enough? These are all possible. Quote, "A case can be made that the hypothesis that we are living in a computer simulation should be given a significant probability. The basic idea behind this so-called simulation argument is that vast amounts of computing power may become available in the future, and that it could be used, among other things, to run large numbers of fine-grained simulations of past human civilizations. Under some not too implausible assumptions, the result can be that almost all minds like ours are simulated minds, and that we should therefore assign a significant probability to being such computer-emulated minds rather than the subjectively indistinguishable minds of originally evolved creatures. And if we are, we suffer the risk that the simulation may be shut down at any time. A decision to terminate our simulation may be prompted by our actions or by exogenous factors. Until a refutation appears of the argument presented, it would be intellectually dishonest to neglect to mention simulation shutdown as a potential extinction mode. If the simulation is indeed turned off, the end would be absolute, permanent, and impossible for us to detect. Since the off switch exists outside of our universe and awareness, we cannot stop it. It'd be like shutting off the lights. Poof, gone. 10 out of 10. Undetectable and permanent. Probably the most abrupt ending on this iceberg. Flood basalt. Flood basalts are usually formed in less than a million years, which is very quick in geological terms, from basaltic rocks spewed out in large volcanic eruption, or multiple smaller ones over a large area. And these are not thin sheets of basalt, they are pretty much mountains and are responsible for terrains like this in Ethiopia. Usually they are multiple hundred meters thick, sometimes as thick as 1,000 meters or 3,000 feet, but stretch very far laterally, hundreds of kilometers wide, covering areas of tens of thousands of square kilometers. Interestingly, because they are formed over a long time, flood basalts look like stairs, forming these small steps. Smaller ones form columns instead, most famously in hexagonal shapes, like seen in Giant's Causeway in Ireland. In Earth's history, these events are linked with at least 5 mass extinctions. Quote, flood basalts, the largest volcanic events in Earth history, triggered dramatic environmental changes on land and in the oceans. Rapid volcanic carbon emissions led to ocean warming, acidification, and deoxygenation that often caused widespread animal extinctions. The Siberian Traps eruption around 252 million years ago was responsible for the mass extinction, wiping out 70% of land animals and 95% of marine life. These eruptions spewed forth 5 to 16 million cubic kilometers or 1.2 to 3.8 million miles of magma, covering an area equaling around 62% of the continental US. Additionally, trillions of tons of carbon dioxide and sulfur dioxide, as well as methane, were emitted, producing extreme greenhouse-like conditions, raising temperatures by at least 2 to 4 degrees Celsius or 3.6 to 7.2 degrees Fahrenheit to as much as 10 degrees Celsius or 18 degrees Fahrenheit. Under those temperatures, plant and marine life struggle to photosynthesize and is lethal to most life. If that wasn't bad enough, the ozone layer was reduced to as little as 15% of its original size due to fires breaking out and reacting with toxic materials, spreading damaging gases into the atmosphere. These toxic gases make its way into our oceans, and due to the heat, oxygen is removed, resulting in oceans that are highly sulfuric and anoxic. If a large prolonged flood basalt eruption would occur similar to this one, it would kill pretty much everyone on Earth. At first, you guessed it, agriculture would be affected due to rising heat, millions would starve, yada yada. Only difference here is that because the oceans will be largely devoid of life, food chains would collapse from the bottom up. Rising heat will make it nigh impossible for humans to live near the equator, resulting in a massive migration crisis. Along with our ozone layer being depleted, it looks grim for humans in this scenario. Our saving grace, however, is the duration of the flood basalts forming. As said previously, they take hundreds of thousands of years to form, meaning we have more than enough time to prepare for the inevitable carnage. In that time period, it is entirely possible we already migrated and colonized Mars or the Moon, so full extinction is probably not likely. I will still give this a 4 out of 10. It is a proven species killer, but one that takes ages to manifest and fully affect us. Man-made black hole. Currently, there is no way for us to create a black hole in a lab. The main way a black hole could be created is via a particle accelerator, like the Large Hadron Collider. However, this particle accelerator, which is the largest on the planet, is not nearly large or strong enough to do this. We would need energies 10 to the 16 times greater than that of the Large Hadron Collider, and it would have to be 1000 light years across in diameter to keep the particles on track. Basically impossible for us now, but let's assume future humans are able to do this. So what if we do get a large enough particle accelerator and we smash 2 protons together at nearly the speed of light? Well, we don't know. But scientists speculate the energies would be so massive, those protons could collapse into a black hole, though it would be unfathomably small. Famed physicist Stephen Hawking theorized black holes emit mass, Hawking radiation, very slowly due to quantum physics. The smaller the black hole, the faster it evaporates. A black hole this small in size and mass would almost instantly evaporate from its own radiation, though no Hawking radiation has been undeniably proven in nature. CERN, the institution running the Large Hadron Collider, had this to say about potential black holes forming, quote, Stable black holes could either be electrically charged or neutral. If stable microscopic black holes had no electric charge, their interactions with the Earth would be very weak. Those produced by cosmic rays would pass harmlessly through the Earth into space, whereas those produced by the Large Hadron Collider could remain on Earth. However, there are much larger and denser astronomical bodies than the Earth in the universe. Black holes produced in cosmic ray collisions with bodies such as neutron stars and white dwarf stars would be brought to rest. The continued existence of such dense bodies, as well as the Earth, rules out the possibility of the Large Hadron Collider producing any dangerous black holes. Okay, but what if we ignore this? What if we had a stable black hole that did not instantly evaporate from a Hawking radiation? This black hole would be attracted by Earth's gravity. More specifically, it would aim for the Earth's core. Here it would oscillate back and forth till it arrives at the core, eating up the heavy materials very slowly. Scientists are not sure how long this process would take. Some estimates show it will take billions of years, while some others speculate it could take centuries or millennia. We really do not know. We wouldn't even notice anything was wrong since it is so small. In any case, it would continue to suck up the Earth's core before it would reach a critical tipping point where the black hole would double in size every few minutes or hours before it would inevitably instantly swallow up Earth in a matter of seconds. A very unceremonious ending, I know. This entry I'll give a 1 out of 10. Currently, this is not even possible, and even if we did create a black hole, it would instantly vaporize. It is incredibly unlikely something like this could even be created. If it was created and stable, it would mean the end of humanity. However, as said previously, we don't know how long its initial phase would take. If it takes billions of years to grow large enough, we would already be long gone by then. If it takes a few centuries or millennia, then yes, this would mean the end of us. 10 out of 10 for that specific scenario. Financial collapse. While pretty vague, a financial collapse would spark the end of modern society as we know it. We've come pretty close to a financial collapse recently. In 2008, excessive speculation on property values led to a collapse in mortgage-backed securities that froze global credit markets, requiring immense bailouts worldwide to prevent the whole financial sector from collapsing. Assuming such a situation repeats now, and we would not be able to successfully stop it, American engineer and writer Dmitry Orlov predicts the world will go through 5 stages. Stage 1. Financial collapse. People across the globe lose faith in the status quo and financial institutions become insolvent, savings are wiped, and capital becomes inaccessible. In 2008 in Iceland, for example, this happened as people lost faith in the banking system. Rather than trying to fix a broken system, new banks were opened to restore order. If this fails, the next stage ensues. Stage 2. Commercial collapse. Credit availability ceases to exist and supply chains tighten, leading to widespread global shortages of necessities like food or fuel. In this stage, mafias or black marketeers could pop up and trade could continue in the underground. If the situation is still not fixed, we would spiral further down. Stage 3. Political collapse. Orlov writes that political establishments, especially the central governments, lose legitimacy and the state can no longer maintain critical infrastructure like power grids, water, the internet, or law and order. In wake of this loss of central power, decentralized asymmetrical groups rise up to fill in the power vacuum. Next, stage 4. Societal collapse. Local institutions, charities, or communities like the church run out of resources or fail through internal conflict, leaving individuals depending on such aid to suffer greatly. This will cause groups to splinter, remain mobile, and search for necessities, and go rogue. Finally, stage 5. Cultural collapse. In this final stage, people lose their sense of compassion and kindness, as well as all sense of order. Family units disband and everyone will be on their own, barely scraping by, and seeing others as adversaries. Battling over the last scarce resources, humans would abandon all social virtues for the desperate struggle for survival. Orlov notes, quote, "Total system collapse can take a long time, decades in fact, and occur so gradually we can't see the forest for the trees. Stage 1 financial collapse is an inevitable consequence of usury, the lending of money at interest, which eventually leads to a deflationary collapse followed by a quick but painful bout of hyperinflation. Assuming we don't get this hyperinflation in control, countries could easily collapse into stage 2 and 3 and not recover from the stagnation. While it is unlikely such a drastic and abrupt collapse can happen, it is not out of the question, simply because the world has never been as interconnected and dependent on each other than any time in history. One global crisis could have a cascading domino effect on the world, throwing us into a deadly spiral that is very hard to get out of. I personally like Orlov's outlook on such a scenario, as it does seem plausible to me. What do you think? Is Orlov too radical in his thinking, or do you deem this realistic? In the end, I'm giving this an 8 out of 10. Humanity would be hit by a reset button, not truly ending us, but spiraling us into a deep, dark age that could send us back decades, perhaps centuries, and could take us a long time to get out of. Grey goo. Grey goo is a term coined by nanotechnology engineer Kim Eric Drexler, known as the godfather of nanotechnology, in his 1986 book Engines of Creation. He describes the state of ecophagy, tiny runaway self-replicating machines that use organic matter to create more copies of themselves. The core tenet of the scenario is simple school math. Drexler writes, quote, "Imagine such a replicator floating in a bottle of chemicals, making copies of itself. The first replicator assembles a copy in 1000 seconds. The 2 replicators then build 2 more in the next 1000 seconds. The 4 build another 4, and the 8 build another 8. At the end of 10 hours, there are not 36 new replicators, but over 68 billion. They would weigh a ton. In less than 2 days, they would outweigh the Earth. In another 4 hours, they would exceed the mass of the Sun and all the planets combined, if the bottle of chemicals hadn't run dry long before. These nanomachines would not be bound by biological constraints and would be much more efficient in reproducing themselves, spreading essentially like pollen, far too small for us to stop. Drexler explains this scenario much better than I can. Quote, "Early assembler-based replicators could beat the most advanced modern organisms. Plants, with leaves, no more efficient than today's solar cells, could outcompete real plants, crowding the biosphere with inedible foliage. Tough omnivorous bacteria could outcompete real bacteria, replicate swiftly, and reduce the biosphere to dust in a matter of days. Dangerous replicators could easily be too tough, small, and rapidly spreading to stop. At least if we made no preparation. We have trouble enough controlling viruses and fruit flies. Of course, these machines would be constrained by the raw materials and resources around them. If left in a closed environment, we would be able to control their growth. If they escape, it looks pretty grim though. First, some patches of grass would disappear, then a local park, followed by a forest and a natural park, then developing a continent before spreading to the whole globe. They would destroy all the plants that photosynthesize, stopping our oxygen and food supply globally. I don't think I need to explain how or why that is deadly for us. No sustenance means no life, especially no intelligent life. Likely, the only organisms that could survive are single-celled ones deep in the oceans. They would probably not mind seeing their competition gone. In the end, we would be done for. Nanomachines would work so efficiently and spread so quickly, we would be reduced to dust in a matter of days. This goo totally would make us go extinct. I'll give this entry a 10 out of 10. A terrifying event, eating all plant life up. Impotence. I'm lumping this entry with another one further down the iceberg, demographic meltdown, since it is essentially talking about the same scenario. In this apocalyptic scenario, human birth rates would plummet and our world population would slowly shrink over some decades, making our age pyramid obelisk-shaped. That is, old people would outweigh young ones by a wide margin. In order for a society to maintain a stable population, a total fertility rate of 2.1 births per woman is required. More than half of the nations on Earth are below this threshold, with some, most famously South Korea, hitting lows of 0.7 births per woman, more than 3 times below the threshold. South Korea will likely be the first nation to experience this scenario, so it really isn't at all theoretical. By 2070, they are projected to shrink to less than 40 million people, with more than 50% of those aged 65 and above. This by all means is unsustainable for any society. As said in the pollution entry in Tier 1, microscopic synthetic materials and toxic gases make their way into our bodies and partly cause impotence. Assuming global birth rates plummet drastically due to this, within a generation or two, we would see the impending collapse of modern society. Especially in Western countries where birth rates are already low and the percentage of older people is more significant, such a change would mean the immediate collapse of the status quo. Pension systems would cease to function, and industrial capacity and production would shrink as well. In general, shops would close down, companies would go insolvent, streets, perhaps entire towns, would look desolate and empty, construction would stop, homes would be vacant, and governments would lose their legitimacy as they will prove to be incapable of providing for their citizens. This would be similar to what happened in the Black Death in the mid-1300s, which I also covered in part 1, so make sure to check out that one if you haven't. I'll quickly recap though. The death of so many people in Europe led to an increase in wages and a leveling of the power distribution. Laborers were more sought after and more highly valued, while land and landowners had a loss of significance and value. I imagine a similar thing would be happening here. At some point though, the population would simply level out to what is sustainable. British demographer Paul Morland paints a dire picture in his 2024 book, quote, "Nothing is more important for humanity's future than recognizing what is happening, understanding its material and ideological causes, and figuring out what we can do if we want humanity to thrive or even to continue existing." It is however very unlikely we become completely impotent and incapable of reproducing. Likely we would have mechanisms to prevent extinction as a species, like freezing sperm and egg cells for future generations. All in all, I will give this entry a 7 out of 10. A demographic decay would take a few decades at least to fully affect us, so we will have plenty of time to prepare for the inevitable decline. Planetal alignment. This belief proposes that the orientation of some planets in our solar system would cause some doomsday event on Earth. Theorists believe the combined gravitational or electromagnetic force from the planets will be exerted onto the Earth or the Sun. While planetary alignments happen somewhat commonly, mainly in syzygies, an incredibly cool word by the way, where the planets align in a somewhat straight line or triangular shape, like seen here, people are more interested in the planetary parades. Most of the planets in the night sky seem to align in a perfectly straight line. I say seem to align because they are not truly aligned in space, but rather lie in an arc due to Earth's relative viewpoint. The theory is exposed in a 1974 book, Jupiter Effect, by astrophysicists John Gribben and Stephen Plakeman. On March 10, 1982, Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Neptune and Pluto were aligned in an arc 95 degrees wide on the same side of the Sun. On this date, the two astrophysicists proposed the alignment would affect tidal forces and predicted a number of catastrophes. Furthermore, they predicted intense solar winds would occur, bombarding Earth's magnetic field with high-energy particles. This would disturb the atmosphere to the point of altering the planet's rotation speed, putting immense stress on tectonic plates, culminating in massive global earthquakes, especially along the San Andreas Fault, and global volcanic eruptions. The book spread like wildfire internationally and instantly became a bestseller, as well as spreading irrational panic. Though after the day passed, nothing of note happened and the world was still the same as the day before. Charles Richter, yes, the same man that invented the Richter scale, even commented and debunked the theory as, quote, astrology in disguise and, quote, very close to pure fantasy. In Tier 1, I talked about the 2012 panic there was in the popular consciousness for a while. In short, on the proposed date, the 31st of December 2012, it was alleged the Earth would align with a black hole in the center of our universe, somehow causing a cataclysmic event. Though again, nothing happened. In physics, the inverse square law dictates that tidal influence is proportional to mass, but inversely proportional to the cube of distance. In more simple terms, the planets or celestial objects are so far away, their combined tidal force on Earth is completely negligible. This is why our moon mainly affects our tides, not, say, Jupiter. Okay, so planetary alignment is baloney. 0 out of 10 for that. What would happen if we were to disregard the inverse square law and assume the planets exert more force than they currently do? Well, to put it bluntly, instant death. Jupiter's pull on Earth is approximately 100 times weaker than the Moon's due to its immense distance. Jupiter is roughly 26,000 times more massive than the Moon. Without the decay of the inverse square law, Jupiter and Saturn would instantly pull Earth toward it, which would end in a violent collision. 10 out of 10. No chance of surviving that one. Andromeda Galaxy. Along with the Milky Way, the Andromeda Galaxy makes up the two largest galaxies in our local group. Because the two galaxies are massive in size and in cosmic terms pretty close to each other, they will inevitably be pulled together by their own combined gravities. Andromeda is racing at us at nearly 110 kilometers per second, or 68 miles per second. For comparison, a cheetah runs around 30 meters per second, or 100 feet a second. It would take Andromeda 6 minutes to trace a full circle around the Earth. In other words, it is pretty damn fast, but still, this will take 4 to 4.5 billion years till the collision happens. This new galaxy would be cutely called Milkomeda, or Milkdromeda. Let's set aside the fact the sun would kill all life on Earth billions of years before that. The night sky would turn into a light show of colorful nebulae and massive star clusters as the two galaxies merge. The chance of two stars or planets colliding into each other is very, very slim, since space is mostly empty. To visualize, if the sun were the size of a ping pong ball, there would be around 3.2 kilometers or 2 miles between one star to the other. Still, there will be a lot of rocks, dust, and stars thrown around in all directions, potentially causing millions of supernovae and new stars being born. Additionally, simulations in 2007 predicted a 50% chance that the solar system will be swept out 3 times farther from the center of the galaxy than currently, and a 12% chance that it will be entirely ejected from the newly formed galaxy, wandering as a rogue system. Though this would have little to no effect on the solar system. NASA astronomer Roland van der Merwe summarizes, quote, "Our findings are statistically consistent with a head-on collision between the Andromeda Galaxy and our Milky Way galaxy. The Milky Way is destined to get a major makeover during the encounter, but our Earth and solar system are in no danger of being destroyed." So likely, nothing would really happen to the solar system, that is, if we don't get hit by rogue planets. Though again, this is incredibly unlikely. We would sadly be long gone before we get to see the spectacular show of light, since our sun would already have killed us by then. 2 out of 10. Universal heat death. Alright, this is the first of 3 ways our universe will end, scientifically speaking, and probably the most well-known one. The heat death of the universe, or big freeze, or big chill, is when all the motion in the universe ceases to exist altogether. This is based on the second law of thermodynamics, which states that entropy, essentially disorder, in an isolated system, which the universe is, will always tend toward an increase. In layman's terms, it means that things will go from very orderly to very disorderly, and things will equal out over time. This theory also assumes the universe will expand infinitely, which there is pretty solid evidence for. Current estimates show that in around 100 trillion years, an unimaginably long time from now, stars and galaxies will cease to form and supernovae will stop. In 10 to 100 quintillion years, remaining galaxies and stars will be spread out into the vast universe, while some form new black holes. Stars will turn into dwarfs and slowly burn out, making our night sky pitch black. In 10 to the 43 years, that is a 10 followed by 43 zeros, all protons and neutrons will have fizzled out and ceased to exist. Once they are gone, the black hole era dominates the universe. As the name says, only black holes will exist by then, gobbling up any stray matter. However, they are not permanent and emit something called Hawking radiation, first proposed by none other than Stephen Hawking. This is a process where black holes emit a faint array of particles and slowly evaporate over very long periods of time. And around a Google years from now, that is a 10 followed by 100 zeros, even those titans will have burnt out. After this, no real matter exists anymore, bar a couple subatomic particles which would be extremely unlikely to interact with each other, reaching extremely low energy levels. It is possible entropy will not be produced any longer, finally reaching the end of the universe, the heat death. Nothing would happen anymore. The distance between subatomic particles is so unfathomably large, no interactions would happen. All the motion is converted into thermal energy at this time, and all the heat would have spread out evenly across the universe. With no energy differences to work with, nothing would and can happen. Lord Kelvin wrote about this in 1862. Kind of crazy he did that back then, by the way. Quote, "The result would inevitably be a state of universal rest and death if the universe were finite and left to obey existing laws. But it is impossible to conceive a limit to the extent of matter in the universe, and therefore science points rather to an endless progress through an endless space of action involving the transformation of potential energy into palpable motion and hence into heat, than to a single finite mechanism running down like a clock and stopping forever. Assuming we are right about our understanding of matter and how energy works, this is mathematically the most certain way our universe will end. 10 out of 10, there is no hope of recovery. It will be absolute and unavoidable." The Big Crunch. The second of the big three ways our universe will end. As you know from the previous entry, the universe is expanding. Whether it will continue accelerating, as it currently is, or slow down is less certain. Astrophysicist Henry Tye comments on the two possibilities, quote, "According to current models, the universe's two simple fates are either it will continue its present expansion forever if the cosmological constant is positive, or if the cosmological constant is negative, it will reach a maximum size, then contract, eventually collapsing to zero. This big crunch defines the end of the universe. For any life, if you want to know how life begins and how life ends, the end points. For our universe, it's also interesting to know, does it have a beginning? Then the next question is, does it have an end? For many years, many people thought it would just go on forever. It's good to know that, if the data holds up, the universe will have an end. We've already explored what would happen in an infinitely expanding universe. So what would happen if the expansion of the universe slows down? Firstly, why would it slow down? Well, the core thought of the theory is that the density of all matter in the universe is great enough to counteract the expansion of the universe. This gravity would create an inward pull, eventually slowing down the expansion fully, before it would start reversing. When the expansion starts reversing, it will end up in galaxies racing into each other, compressing all there is into smaller and smaller space. Over trillions of years, we would see a bright night sky as new stars are born from the matter being flung around and black holes forming. The universe eventually contracts further and further and accelerates as gravitational pull increases, eventually raising temperatures higher than that of the surface of the sun. The universe contracts to a point where all matter is concentrated into a single point, a singularity. It is theorized that, following the formation of a singularity, the mass is so great a new universe could spring into existence, a new Big Bang. This theory is known as the Big Bounce and could explain why the universe exists today. However, it's important to mention that the theory is not popular among scientists any longer. Recent models have shown dark energy exhibits something called inflation, which affects the expansion of the universe. It is estimated the universe would need something like 17 times the mass to counteract this inflationary effect. All in all, I really like the Big Crunch and Big Bounce, as it would give us a nice and neat explanation of how the universe started and how it will end. Even though it is pretty unlikely, we are not 100% certain how dark energy works and if there is a caveat to the ever-accelerating universe. For all we know, we may be wrong, and the universe could in fact end up in a Big Crunch. In any case, if this were true, it would mean the end of all life. Therefore, I'm giving it a 10 out of 10. But perhaps in the distant future, there may be new life springing into existence in another iteration of the universe, in the next Big Bounce. The Big Rip. Alright, this is the last of the big three ways our universe will end, I promise. So we've explored what happens in a constantly accelerating universe, that is, the Big Freeze, what happens in an accelerating, then decelerating universe, ending in the Big Crunch, but now, what happens in a universe that just continues accelerating, becoming faster and faster? Well, we would end up in something called the Big Rip. Without getting too deep into the physics, the core idea is that a variety of energy, phantom energy, exists, not to be confused with dark energy. While dark energy stays constant, phantom energy grows greater and greater and helps accelerate the expansion of the universe ever further. Gravity holding the galaxies together would be too weak to counteract the forces pushing against the boundaries of the universe. 60 million years before the Big Rip, first galaxies would be ripped apart, as its gravity will be too weak to hold its stars together. 3 months before the end, the solar system would become gravitationally unbound and our planets would be stripped away from their orbits, becoming rogue. Around 30 minutes before the end, the Earth cannot hold itself together and is violently ripped into shreds. In the last fraction of a second, space-time itself is torn apart, as well as atoms and their building blocks, becoming a hazy mist of subatomic particles. Professor of Physics and Astronomy at Dartmouth College commented, quote, "Once the phantom dark energy becomes more dense than a particular object, that object gets torn to shreds. First, phantom dark energy would pull the Milky Way apart, sending its constituent stars flying. Then the solar system would be unbound, because the pull of dark energy would become stronger than the pull of the sun on the Earth. Finally, in a few frantic minutes, the Earth would explode. Then atoms themselves would shatter, a fraction of a second before the universe itself ripped apart." Though importantly, Caldwell himself calls this scenario outlandish. And he is right, this mathematically is less likely than the theory of heat death. Current findings point towards this phantom energy being virtually non-existent and dark energy being much weaker than portrayed here. If we assume it did exist and the expansion of the universe is accelerated by it, the same fate would happen to us, instant death. This scenario would take such a long time, we would be long gone by then. But yes, this scenario will end in the termination of any matter in the universe, an absolute cosmic doomsday. 10 out of 10. Supernova. We're still not done with the cosmic threats. I've mentioned supernovae a couple times before, but I never really explained what they are or how they could be a threat to us. A supernova is essentially just a star that violently explodes near the end of its life cycle. Their explosion is so massive and powerful they can briefly outshine an entire galaxy for weeks or months before fizzling out. Supernovae are the main source of many heavy elements and are the reason life even exists. They also emit massive gamma ray bursts, which I mentioned in Tier 2, so check that out if you haven't. Far away supernovae do not impact Earth whatsoever, but near ones, within around 10 to 300 parsecs, or around 30 to 1000 light years, have impacted Earth in the past. It is thought two massive extinctions on Earth, the late Devonian, around 372 million years ago, and the late Ordovician, 445 million years ago, were caused by gamma ray bursts, originating from massive supernovae near us. In those events, 85% of all life was wiped out. I will be mostly repeating myself from the last tier, but I'll quickly recap. A gamma ray burst directly hitting us is very, very unlikely, though not impossible. If one originating from a supernova hits us, Earth's atmosphere would be pretty much halved. A chemical reaction will take place wherein the gamma radiation disassociates nitrogen and oxygen to form nitrogen oxides. This will create a sort of fog, blocking most sunlight and leading to rapid cooling. This will inevitably drop temperatures by multiple degrees and would make life on Earth impossible. Global agriculture would collapse, leading to mass starvation of billions. Our atmosphere being damaged would cause genetic deformation and DNA damage to remaining survivors. It would take up to a decade, if not longer, for the ozone layer to fully replenish its shield and wash out the nitrogen oxides. And it is very unlikely humans could survive this long under those conditions. Like the gamma ray burst entry, I will rate it the same way, 10 out of 10. Qiyamah. Yom al-Qiyamah. I'm trying. In Islam is Judgment Day. In the Quran, the event is split up into 4 phases. A quick disclaimer that I'm condensing hundreds of years of Muslim religious tradition into just a couple few minutes, so I may get stuff wrong or I have to leave some stuff unmentioned, just so you know. Firstly, the signs of the hour. Here, major and minor signs will appear in our world, warning of impending judgment. Minor signs include loss of youthfulness or traditional wisdom. Major signs include supernatural entities, like the Dajjal appearing, essentially the Muslim version of the Antichrist, tricking people into believing in a false deity and straying away from the path of God. Second, the sounding of the trumpets. A loud trumpet will be heard across the globe, and a fire blast will cause massive terror, where mountains are, quote, lifted up and crushed with a single blow, and heaven is physically split. Essentially, the earth is completely annihilated. Then, a second trumpet is sounded. This one wipes out everything living, except God himself. After some time, the trumpet is sounded again, resurrecting every living being. Thirdly, judgment. This is, well, the time where God will judge every living being based on their actions and flaws. no matter how small. Between the resurrection and judgment, everyone will have to wait in their sunlight, sweating for centuries, with sinners and non-believers waiting and suffering more. Lastly, when everyone is justly judged, they will cross a bridge, where the sinners fall down to hell and the righteous ones cross to paradise. While some sinners get a chance of redeeming themselves. That's basically the gist of it. Again, I'm sorry if I left out a lot of stuff or got some stuff wrong. Unlike the rapture in Christianity, the earth would cease to exist and death would be instant, with no chance of surviving as a human. There will be also no time to prepare. One would only hear the trumpet and see the earth explode. The second trumpet would kill all remaining life in one swoop. There would be no survivors, only judgment. A hard reset. 10 out of 10. Nibiru Cataclysm. I briefly touched on this in the Mayan prophecy entry in Tier 1. The story starts with Wisconsin woman Nancy Leader, who alleged she was contacted by grey extraterrestrials called Zetans, who implanted a device in her brain. In 1995, she founded Zeta Talk, a website where she brought forth her ideas to the public. In 1997, comet Hale-Bopp made its way into our solar system close to the Sun. It was one of the brightest comets ever discovered and was visible to the naked eye. As scientists announced its approach, Leader commented, quote, "The Hale-Bopp comet does not exist. It is a fraud, perpetrated by those who would have the teeming massive quiescent until it is too late. Hale-Bopp is nothing more than a distant star. It will draw no closer." She claimed this comet was a ruse to draw attention away from Planet X, which would soon pass into our solar system and destroy the Earth. By the way, Planet X refers to an alleged 9th planet outside of our solar system, which might actually exist. The X does not refer to the Roman numeral 10, if you're wondering. It refers to the saying that X marks the spot. Back to Leader. She claimed Planet X was roughly 4 times larger than the Earth and would approach us on May 27, 2003. According to her, its approach would cause a geomagnetic pole shift, where Earth's magnetic poles would swap places, causing widespread destruction globally. This is actually an entry later down the iceberg, so stay tuned for the next part. After the day passed, nothing happened. Leader claimed it was a lie purported by the aliens and would no longer disclose any date, fearing governments would declare martial law and trap people in cities, causing mass deaths. Now, there was an author, Zechariah Sitchin, who proposed the idea that the ancient Sumerians had knowledge of a secret undiscovered planet called Nibiru. He alleges the Anunnaki in Sumerian mythology were not deities, but rather ancient astronauts from Nibiru. He wrote, quote, "There is one more planet in our own solar system, not light years away, that comes between Mars and Jupiter every 3,600 years. People from that planet came to Earth almost 500,000 years ago and did many of the things about which we read in the Bible, in the book of Genesis. I prophesied the return of this planet called Nibiru at this time. The planet is inhabited by intelligent human beings like us who will come and go between their planet and our planet. They created Homo sapiens. We look like them." Although Sitchin on multiple occasions has denied any affiliation between his thoughts and what Leader believes in, people made the connection between the two, and groups cited December 21st, 2012 as Doomsday, when Nibiru will collide with Earth. Of course, this did not happen, and the world is still here. But what would happen if Nibiru collided with Earth? We can actually make some well-educated guesses. In Earth's early history, around 4.5 billion years ago, a planet the size of Mars collided with the young Earth. This planet, named Theia, struck Earth with such a force it vaporized the crust and smashed an unfathomable amount of material into space. This debris then consolidated and is believed to be the reason why the Moon exists. So if a planet 4 times as massive as the Earth struck us today, it would result in total annihilation of all life on Earth. Unlike a meteor impact, where small pockets of life or humanity can survive in isolated places, an object this massive in size would be unsurvivable. It would shred the Earth's crust, cause debris to rain, create a long winter, and just overall apocalypse. Perhaps some life could exist, though this is uncertain. During the Theia event, there wasn't even life on Earth, so we really don't know what it would look like. It wouldn't really matter though, we would all perish. 10 out of 10. Food chain collapse. the last entry for this tier. I've been mentioning a collapse of the food chain throughout this iceberg, so I will be mostly repeating myself here. There are two ways a food chain can collapse. A food chain can collapse from the bottom up and top down. A bottom up collapse is probably what you're first thinking of. This mainly occurs when there is not enough sunlight to feed the primary producer with vital nutrients. If there is not enough sunlight, plants or algae photosynthesize less and stop reproducing as much, and can thus not create as many offspring to replace the population that is eaten by predators. At some point, the primary producers will die off fully, leading to the death of the predators who cannot produce energy of their own and fully rely on the producers. This in turn leads to the death of the predators eating the predators, and so on, till it reaches the top of the food chain, which is where we are. In essence, this is a big domino effect in action. In nature, this doesn't happen all too often, since there is usually always a balance in the food chain, but it does occur when Mother Nature shows her violent side, mainly in natural disasters such as floods, volcanic eruptions, meteor impacts, and more. Food chains can collapse from the top down as well. This mainly happens when we overhunt or overfish certain areas. For example, overfishing of the North Atlantic cod in the 90s led to a massive outbreak of invasive species and overpopulation of crabs, showing how delicately balanced an ecosystem really can be. A collapse of the food chain would have obvious consequences on us humans. We are at the top of the food chain, so a collapse from the bottom up will be devastating. In history, if there was a particularly cold, harsh, and prolonged winter, food availability plummets and famine can spread incredibly rapidly. A bad harvest was especially bad pre-industrialization. Today, we are more resilient to those factors, but definitely not immune. A massive volcano outbreak blocking most of the sunlight from entering Earth's atmosphere, or a deadly virus killing off our crops could quickly usher us into a global crisis. A prolonged crisis like this, say over months or a year, could quickly trigger multiple crises itself. There could be social unrest, revolution, war over resources, economic collapse, and much more. Human population could contract to as little as a fifth of its current size within a generation or two, leading to a global labor shortage and a deep dark age. I could go on and on about the consequences, but I believe you get the point. A collapse of the food chain from the bottom up is really dangerous, since we are not prepared for a prolonged crisis like this, especially since the world has never been as interconnected and dependent on each other as at any time in history. While humanity could persevere, we would definitely enter a dark age, setting us back decades, perhaps even centuries, and leading to a massive economic downturn. Because of this, I will be giving this a solid 8 out of 10 of ending us. It is a proven way to kill lots of people very quickly, but not enough to wipe us off the planet. Moon leaves its orbit. While the moon is receding from Earth at a rate of roughly 3.78 centimeters, about the same length a human fingernail grows in a year, it would take around 50 billion years before the moon escapes our orbit fully. For reference, the sun will engulf Earth in its plasma in 5 billion years from now, so you really needn't worry. Our beloved moon isn't going anywhere. The only way the moon could leave its orbit is if it was hit by an object the size of an entire planet, accelerating the moon past its escape velocity, flinging it outward. Scientists call these rogue moons becoming planets in their own right planets, planet and moon combined. And no, I'm not kidding, that's what they actually call them. We haven't definitively found any, but they are theorized to exist around other stars. Let's assume the moon disappears in one instant though. What would happen? You may be aware that the moon mainly dictates Earth's tides. A moonless Earth would therefore experience much weaker tides, around a third of its current strength, impacting marine ecosystems that rely on the tides. Predators hunting in the moonlight would starve, while prey populations like mice would explode. Migratory queues for certain bird species would also fail, leading to population crashes. Additionally, the moon keeps Earth's tilt at a stable 23.5 degrees. Without a moon, this tilt would wobble over tens of thousands of years, swinging widely from a tilt of 0 degrees to as much as 85 degrees, effectively turning our planet on its side. Science writer Connor Feely notes, quote, "Without the moon to stabilize it, this wobble could become extreme and erratic. In this scenario, predictable seasons would vanish, and the poles would sometimes be at the equator. The results would drastically alter Earth's habitability, as the once predictable environment would become hostile to many forms of life." One hemisphere would likely experience a permanent winter, the other a permanent summer. Humanity would likely have to migrate toward the equator, where the temperatures and seasonal changes aren't as harsh. Hundreds of millions, perhaps billions of people would be displaced because of this. Areas near the poles would become extremely inhospitable, even for animals accustomed to the environment. All in all, ecosystems around the globe, especially marine life, would be severely disrupted and perhaps go extinct, while vital crops could stop growing due to the harsh temperature and seasonal changes. This sounds grim, but surprisingly would not be the end of humanity, nor the Earth. Our planet could survive without a moon easily, and life could go on. Mankind would struggle, but likely will persevere. We would have to find new ways to reliably grow our food and contain the food chain collapse, though the axial tilt changing would take a long time to really affect us. Thus, I will give this entry a 5 out of 10. It will kill a lot of people over millennia, but it is survival for the rest of mankind. Ragnarok. Ragnarok means Twilight of the Gods or Fate of the Gods in Old Norse and describes the end of the world in Norse mythology. Once again, like in the previous religious entries, I am condensing hundreds of years of religious tradition into just a few minutes, so I'm bound to miss something or get a couple things wrong, but I'll try. Basically, Ragnarok is a series of events starting with the time of man, the current day, where everything is going somewhat alright. Societal decline and loss of morality leads to mankind warring each other. Masses die and hope dwindles. Mankind then enters something called Fimbulwinter, a climatic event consisting of 3 consecutive years of snow and frost with no intervening summer, essentially a long volcanic winter without a volcano. Fenrir, a mythical wolf monster, escapes his bonds and is set free to roam the frozen planet. The Midgard serpent, who is said to be a monstrous sea serpent biting its own tail, the Norse version of an Ouroboros, is set free as it releases its tail. Loki, the god of mischief, is also set free from his prison, and dead spirits are summoned. These evil forces clash against the good gods. A massive war begins where the gods are felled and evil reigns supreme. As 13th century historian Snorri Sturluson writes in the Prose Edda, quote, "Men will know misery, adulteries be multiplied, an axe age, a sword age, shields will be cloven, a wind age, a wolf age, before the world's ruin. Giant wolves devour the sun and the moon, the earth sinks into an endless sea, and the sky is cut open, raining fire and ice from above." This would be the literal end of the world, though there is hope. 2 humans are set to survive and repopulate the earth after the dust settles and earth rises from the sea once again. Fallen gods are resurrected and the world is reborn. After this, everlasting peace is set to govern the earth. Once again, I'm grossly oversimplifying and condensing a lot of historical works for this, but this is essentially the gist. In the end, all but 2 humans survive the end of the world. Billions upon billions would die. Plant and animal life would also perish due to the permanently submerged earth and missing sunlight from the Fimbulwinter. There is hope at the end though, as the evil forces diminish and vanish and the gods reign once more, creating a peace that lasts forever. 9.5 out of 10. Cyborg assimilation. I've hinted at this scenario in earlier entries already. Essentially, it describes a scenario where technology advances to such a state where we can integrate our brains to a computer and become partly or totally entwined with robotics. These cyborgs could gain perfect eyesight, superhuman intelligence, strength, speed, and whatnot. At first, this technological advancement will be used therapeutically and in medical fields to cure blindness, deafness, or other ailments. The problem with, for example, brain chips is that they will be likely owned by a single large and powerful corporation or the government. And as you know, if you give someone a very powerful tool that can be used to control people, they will absolutely control you. A chip owned by a large corporation can be used to surveil one's thoughts or even control one's movements, as they would be able to inspect the neurological activity inside your brain and send impulses if they wanted to. Assuming this chip becomes mandatory for everyone, like an ID card for example, for the first time ever, states could actually read your mind. Dissent and protesting against the government would become physically impossible. Not virtually, quite literally, physically. impossible. They could erase your thoughts, your memories, or punish you for thinking a particular way. This is similar to the thought police in 1984. Quite the scary outcome. People will lose their sense of self as they are molded to conform a certain standard, likely being forced to think positively for the state and work inhuman hours, becoming modern-day slaves. The individual would have zero defensive capabilities once their brain is hooked up to a large network of brain chips. Assuming this does not become available to everyone in a population, it would still not look very positive. If a certain population gets access to brain chips, enhancing their human capabilities, which, let's be real, would only be available to the very rich, quote-unquote, normal humans would become second-class citizens. In the same way as before, dissent and uprisings would become impossible, as these superhuman cyborgs would be able to keep everyone in check. As Professor of Cybernetics Kevin Warwick at Reading University notes, quote, "In the future, I believe, we will be able to send signals to and from human and machine brains. We will be able to directly harness the memory and mathematical capabilities of machines. We will be able to communicate across the internet by means of thought signals alone. Human speech and language, as we know it, will become obsolete. Ultimately, humans will become a lower form of life, unable to compete with either intelligent machines or cyborgs. I want to be a cyborg." While cybernetics and technological advancements enhancing human capabilities sound good on paper, in reality, it is a double-edged sword with massive implications. With this technology, we are actively playing with fire. It could easily be used to mass monitor populations and instate a totalitarian regime with no way of rising up against it. We could either become transhumans or become cattle, in a state similar to that of Oceania. Really dangerous stuff, meaning the end of humanity. 9 out of 10. An apocalypse that does not end with a bang, but with the designer clicking billions of neurons joining the grid, forever erasing the line between the man and machine, between the person and program. Environmental toxins. I've been also sort of talking about this topic in earlier entries, mainly when talking about pollution. Synthetic materials, mainly forever chemicals, PFAS, or endocrine-disrupting chemicals, like those found in non-stick cookware, preservatives, or plastics, are notorious for being incredibly bad for the environment. Like, so bad that some materials take millennia to fully break down in nature. They stay there for a very long time, and even microscopic residue can be very lethal to the delicately balanced ecosystems. These residues make their way up the food chain, starting with, for example, planktons, small fish, larger fish, and then ending up on our plates. These chemicals we ingest have a profound impact on our physiology. They make their way into our bloodstreams and tissues, namely leading to a loss of sperm count in men, thyroid problems, obesity, or even declining cognitive capacities. Lessening sperm counts in men leads to less births, and thus to shrinking populations, which is actually an entry I covered in the last part, so check that out if you haven't yet. While that alone does not pose the end of humanity, we would definitely shrink to a fraction of what is currently the human population. Additionally, toxins or materials poisoning the primary producers, like phytoplankton or bees, is detrimental to the global food chain. A disruption of a single producer in the chain makes its way up the chain, ushering in a domino effect, eventually hitting us at the top as a result. While this alone likely won't end humanity as a whole, toxins in the air we breathe may be much more lethal. Smog today kills millions annually, causing immense health risks in extremely urbanized areas, such as India or China. If smog becomes worse, or say, some toxin makes its way into our atmosphere and spreads rapidly before we can stop it, it is uncertain whether we would be able to survive such a catastrophe. I give this entry an 8.5 out of 10. It really depends what toxins we are talking about. Environmental pollution and toxins in our oceans would pose a great threat to Earth's ecosystems, but that alone would be survivable for mankind. I'm less sure about a scenario where the air we breathe kills us. That would be a certain species killer, though I doubt total extinction is probable. Nemesis star. In 1983, late paleontologists David Raup and John Sapkowski found evidence of mass extinctions in Earth's history not being random, but rather following a periodic cycle. While the two could not explain the cause, teams of scientists picked up the idea, leading to a 1984 paper published by the astronomer Mark Davis postulating the existence of a red or brown dwarf star orbiting far outside our solar system, calling it Nemesis. Quote, a 26 million year periodicity has recently been seen in the fossil record of extinction in the geologic past. We propose that the periodic events are triggered by a dark companion to the Sun, traveling in a moderately eccentric orbit, which at its closest approach passes through the Oort cloud of comets which is believed to surround the Sun. During each passage, this unseen solar companion perturbs the orbit of these comets, sending a large number of them, over 1 billion, into paths which reach the inner solar system. Several of these hit the Earth on the average in the following million years. At present, the unseen companion should be approximately at its maximum distance from the Sun, about 2 light years, and it shall present no danger to the Earth until approximately 15 million AD. It is proposed that early on in the solar system's life, the Sun was part of a binary star system. That is, there was another star along the Sun a long time ago. This star allegedly separated from the solar system over 4 billion years ago and is now orbiting far away in the Oort cloud. The Oort cloud is home to an unfathomable amount of small celestial bodies which could be gravitationally attracted by Nemesis in the past to be redirected into our solar system. This would explain the alleged periodic mass extinctions in the past and the origin of asteroids hitting Earth. This Nemesis star would be quite small, but definitely detectable even in the 1980s. That means it escaped our scope or is already a part of a database of red or brown dwarfs, but is indistinguishable from objects further away. Though more recent missions with more modern technology have all but proven Nemesis does not exist. David Morrison at NASA wrote, quote, the Sun is not part of a binary star system. There has never been any evidence to suggest a companion. The idea has been disproven by several infrared sky surveys, most recently the WISE mission. If there were a brown dwarf companion, these sensitive infrared telescopes would have detected it. Assuming Nemesis were real and approaching its next closest orbit to the Sun today, Earth would likely be hit by a shower of meteors, possibly lasting centuries. While we would be able to detect and prepare against the upcoming carnage, the sheer amount of small rocks being flung toward the Earth would be too much to bear for modern society. Likely, we would not survive this. Assuming it does take millions of years till Nemesis has a real effect on Earth, we would probably be advanced enough to shield ourselves from asteroids, though this is of course speculative. In any case, I will give this entry a 4 out of 10. Nemesis likely does not exist, and if it does, we have more than enough time to prepare. But if it does arrive today, then yes, we would die off over centuries of relentless cosmic showers. 10 out of 10 for that particular scenario. La Palma megatsunami. Proposed in a 2001 paper by geophysicists Stephen Ward and Simon Day, they hypothesized that a future eruption of the Cumbre Vieja volcano on the island of La Palma in the Atlantic Ocean may cause a massive landslide. Quote, geological evidence suggests that during a future eruption, Cumbre Vieja volcano on the island of La Palma may experience a catastrophic failure of its west flank, dropping 150 to 500 cubic kilometers of rock into the sea. Using a geologically reasonable estimate of landslide motion, we modeled tsunami waves produced by such a collapse. Waves generated by the runout of a 500 cubic kilometer side block at 100 meters per second could transit the entire Atlantic basin and arrive on the coasts of the Americas with 10 to 25 meters height. This massive landslide of mostly mud and volcanic debris would push up a massive dome of water roughly 900 meters or almost 3,000 feet thick above the site. As the dome collapses, waves of multiple meters high would be displaced and cause tsunamis to the nearby coastal regions. The geophysicists predicted waves with heights of 10 to 25 meters or 33 to 82 feet reaching major urban centers like New York, Miami, Rio de Janeiro, and more, possibly affecting up to 100 million people. though recent models and modern research has shown that these landslides typically occur in smaller, bite-sized steps rather than a single massive block. Modern simulations show waves hitting the Americas would likely only reach a height of 1 to 2 meters or 3 to 7 feet, which is comparable to a common storm surge, so it really is nothing to worry about at all. Additionally, Cumbre Vieja has exploded multiple times throughout the centuries, and since 1400 no large waves have been detected originating from the volcano. The volcano actually erupted somewhat recently in 2021. While it has left the island in a bad shape, no large waves were recorded. Dr. George Pararas Karayanis, a leading tsunami expert, concludes, quote, "Based on geologic evidence and historic events, the study concludes that massive flank collapses of Cumbre Vieja or Kilauea volcanoes are extremely unlikely to occur in the near geologic future. The flanks of these island stratovolcanoes will continue to slip aseismically as in the past. Sudden slope failures can be expected to occur along fault paralleling rift zones, but these will occur in phases over a period of time and not necessarily as single, sudden, large-scale massive collapses. The threat of megatsunami generation from massive flank failures of island stratovolcanoes has been greatly overstated." Okay, so a massive tsunami has been ruled out, but what if we assume the worst case scenario were true and a megatsunami of this proportion would occur? Well, as stated previously, the volcano is located in the Atlantic and would therefore only affect coastal regions in the Atlantic, namely the Americas and the Mediterranean. Waves would devastate massive urban centers in the west and cause economic and political instability in western countries, but this would be contained in only those areas, meaning only a portion of the human population would be affected. Yes, this would be pretty bad and would kill tens of millions of people, but extinction is out of the question, even if the hypothetical tsunami were as bad as it was made out to be. 1 out of 10. Not really something that ends humanity. We could recover from this easily. Electromagnetic pulse. An electromagnetic pulse, or EMP, is something you probably have heard in Call of Duty or another shooter. It's a real thing though, and a dangerous one at that. EMPs can either be generated naturally or artificially. They are very short bursts of intense electromagnetic energy. Unlike, say, a gamma ray burst, which mainly affects us biologically, EMPs carry its destructive potential via electric or magnetic fields. In other words, they don't directly pose a threat to us, but rather attack our power grids and everything electronic, really. The most famous natural EMP is the Carrington event of 1859. On September 1st to 2nd, 1859, a massive geomagnetic storm led to a large coronal mass ejection, or CME, where large portions of the sun's plasma is ejected into space, which consequently hit Earth. It was the largest geomagnetic storm in recorded history and caused global telegraph systems to fail, throwing sparks, shocking operators, and even starting fires in telegraph stations. Solar flares were so bright, people recorded seeing the night as late as 1 AM. We were lucky this EMP hit us in the 1850s, where most of the world was connected via telegraph rather than modern cables and power grids. The damage was therefore pretty minimal. An EMP can also be generated artificially, mainly via nuclear warheads. This was seen in the 1962 detonation of Starfish Prime. The US detonated a 1.4 megaton warhead 400 kilometers or 250 miles above the Johnston Atoll in the Pacific. The blast was 500 times more powerful than the Hiroshima bomb and knocked out streetlights, disabled telephones, and other electrical appliances as far away as Hawaii, around 1400 kilometers or 900 miles away. The damage once again was pretty minimal, but keep in mind we are capable of much more massive nuclear explosions nowadays. If a natural EMP originating from a solar storm hits us today with a similar power to that of the Carrington event, or a massive nuclear warhead exploded and generated a large EMP, the damage on Earth would be considerable. EMPs are not shown to pose a great threat to the human body, so contact with electrical appliances are more or less safe, though side effects like internal burns, brain damage, or even nervous system damage have been seen. For that to happen, one must be extremely close to the blast though, and if you are that close, you probably have more urgent problems to deal with. More importantly, EMPs affect our electronics more than anything else. They can temporarily or even permanently render them useless. As electronics get smaller and smaller and run on lower and lower energy levels, high voltage EMPs will affect much of critical infrastructure. According to research by writer Yoshida Reiji, quote, "A nuclear device detonated at high altitude could disrupt nearly all types of electronics within range, including computers, power grids, and communication systems. If a 10 kiloton atomic bomb is detonated 30 kilometers above the Kanto region, it would have a 602 kilometer radius of effect that would cover most of Honshu. Recovery could take years." So if either an artificial or natural EMP hit large population centers, important infrastructure such as water, food and emergency services, or even nuclear plants would cease to function in an instant with no warning whatsoever. This, by all means, would be incredibly deadly. Billions would starve, dehydrate, freeze, or would be killed by subsequent nuclear reactors melting down. The world would fall into disarray and societal collapse is more than certain. 9 out of 10. It would be a certain civilizational reset. I predict upward of 90% of humans would die, leaving the rest to rebuild modern society, launching us back to pre-industrialization. Magnetic field shift, or geomagnetic pole reversal, involves the Earth's magnetic poles flipping by 180 degrees, swapping places. The flow of iron at Earth's core is responsible for creating magnetic currents, and, historically, Earth's poles have shifted many times. The last time this happened was around 780,000 years ago. A reversal happens approximately every 250,000 years to 500,000 years, so we're statistically well overdue for a shift. In fact, the poles have drifted around 2,000 kilometers or 1,200 miles from the Canadian Arctic to Siberia and are moving about 22 miles or 35 kilometers per year, taking thousands of years till it fully flips. During this transition, the magnetic field strength can drop as low as 10% of its normal capacity. Normally, it shields us against solar and cosmic radiation, but with a magnetic field that weak, our ozone layer would be destroyed, leaving species, including us, with much more DNA damage and genetic mutations. This wouldn't necessarily cause a mass extinction, but we would see more genetically mutated species and plants as a result. Additionally, due to a weaker shield, electronics will be much more susceptible to solar winds, resulting in mostly the same outcomes I explained in the earlier EMP entry. Science journalist Alana Mitchell writes in her assessment, quote, "We have blithely built our civilization's critical infrastructure during a time when the planet's magnetic field was relatively strong, not accounting for the fields bent for anarchy. A reversal could destroy anything electronic, including home appliances, satellites, wireless devices, and electric grids that make all these items work." Even though this sounds pretty bad on paper, the shift takes hundreds or thousands of years to really affect us, so we have ample time to prepare for the inevitable switch. Assuming the geomagnetic poles switch immediately right now, humanity would not go biologically extinct, but society as we know it would cease to exist. Global communications, power grids, and critical infrastructure reliant on a stable system would collapse, resulting in the deaths of billions through social fallout. I give this entry a solid 9 out of 10. It is a guaranteed geological event and will happen no matter what. If we don't prepare appropriately, this will result in us getting sent back to the pre-industrialized era, perhaps even the Stone Age. Who knows? Solidifying core. This scenario proposes Earth's core solidifying would cause some apocalyptic scenario. We don't have to look far to see what this would look like. Mars's core cooled much faster, becoming pretty much solid within a billion years of its formation. Mars's magnetic field thus became weaker and weaker, eventually losing it altogether due to millions of years of solar winds hitting the already weak shield. Without the magnetic field, a constant rain of subatomic particles hit hit Mars, eventually stripping it of an atmosphere as well. Side note, in all technicality, Mars does still have a magnetic field and an atmosphere. The magnetic field is very irregular and weak, while the atmosphere is super thin and feeble and consists of mostly carbon dioxide and nitrogen. In practice, neither of those could be strong enough to shield us from future cosmic radiation though. Earth's core will eventually cool down and go entirely solid as well, but you don't have to worry, that won't happen for at least 1 billion years. Assuming Earth's core went fully solid today, the magnetic field would be blown away by solar winds before the ozone layer would diminish, and finally our atmosphere would dissipate into the vastness of space. Importantly, it would take thousands of years between one stage to the other. Even if the core solidified right now, it would be an inevitable end to any life on Earth. Earth's surface would be bombarded by deadly radiation, eventually thinning out our atmosphere and suffocating any life. Without the pressure of an atmosphere, oceans would also boil away and evaporate into gas, blown out into interstellar space. Life would slowly cease to exist, and any possibility of future life appearing again is erased forever. 10 out of 10. A true slow burner of a scenario, taking thousands of years to fully take effect, but one that is inevitable and unstoppable. Mass insanity. Mass insanity mainly manifests itself through mass psychogenic illnesses, MPIs, or more well known by its alias, mass hysteria. You may have heard about this phenomenon if you're on this side of YouTube. It is the rapid spread of illness signs and symptoms of a cohesive group with no biological cause. A particular group shares a mass delusion and share the same symptoms, such as nausea, hyperventilation, seizures, or delusions. This has happened quite a few times throughout recorded history, most famously in 1518, where hundreds of people in Strasbourg had an uncontrollable urge to dance for days on end. This lasted for weeks, and people were reportedly dying of exhaustion, strokes, or heart failure because of non-stop dancing. And this event just happened seemingly out of nowhere. A contemporary source writes, quote, Frau Trophäa had started dancing on July 14th on the narrow cobbled street outside her half-timbered home. As far as we can tell, she had no musical accompaniment, but simply began to dance. Some of those who had witnessed her strange performance had begun to mimic her, and within days more than 30 choreomaniacs were in motion, some so monomaniacally that only death would have the power to intervene. Modern scholars agree on the mass hysteria hypothesis, though some argue food poisoning led to the dancing plague. Otherwise, there is no explanation to this phenomenon. A more recent example of mass hysteria is the 2016 Havana syndrome. US and Canadian government officials and their families stationed abroad reportedly kept hearing loud screeching noises, as well as headaches, cognitive problems, issues balancing, dizziness, and much more. For seemingly no reason. One such location was in Havana, Cuba, which is what the syndrome is named after. While there are no official numbers, media outlets reported around 1,000 cases of Havana syndrome across a dozen or so countries by 2022. There are many more cases of mass hysteria, so many in fact, you can fit an entire iceberg with them, and let me know if you want a deep dive into that. In any case, a global event enveloping all of humanity into believing a mass delusion and going insane is basically impossible, though assuming there is some advanced government weapon that is capable of mind-controlling large populations, it could be used for nefarious purposes. Someone with ill intent could use this technology to spread a mass delusion, leading to panic across the globe, depending on the severity of the delusion and the duration. Therefore, it is very hard to rate this entry. Whether humanity could regain control of their minds and rebuild society is hard to tell. I, however, don't think such a scenario would be able to fully make humanity go extinct. 8 out of 10. Mass suicide. What a way to start the video, huh? I recommend you to skip this if you are easily triggered by mentions of suicide. This is similar to the mass insanity entry from the earlier tier. See my last video for that. Except that now, some sort of cult or ideology convinces people to off themselves. Sadly, this is not a fictional thing and has happened in the past, like the Heaven's Gate mass suicide in 1997 or the earlier People's Temple mass suicide in 1978 in Jonestown, Guyana. Both are insane rabbit holes in of themselves and deserve a video in their own right. I wouldn't make it justice. The scenario, however, moves beyond these localized cold tragedies, and instead people globally, driven by a pervasive drive for death or a crushing sense of existential despair and nihilism, chooses non-existence as a species as the only rational solution to the suffering they experience. Assuming there is some charismatic leader, this belief would have to spread very fast and psychologically infect people across the globe, likely via the internet and social medias, reframing life itself not as a gift, but as moral evil that must be corrected through a final voluntary act. Perhaps some AI in the future will convince us this is the only rational choice, or that we realize we live in a simulation and that life is thus inherently meaningless. Sociologist Emil Durkheim wrote in his foundational work, quote, "The more the groups to which the individual belongs are numerous and strong, the more he depends on them, the more he consequently yields to the collective impulse. Man cannot become attached to higher aims and submit to a rule if he sees nothing above him to which he belongs. To free him from all social pressure is to abandon him to himself and demoralize him. When this ultimate crisis comes, when there is no way out, that is the very moment when we explode from within and a totally other emerges. The sudden surfacing of a strength, a security of unknown origin, welling up from beyond reason, rational expectation, and hope." Durkheim suggests that a society that is so interconnected and interwoven with each other could theoretically fall prey to the unified desire towards self-destruction. Keep in mind, this would be incredibly unlikely. The drive toward ending oneself is not a natural one, and is of course never the right option. I want to point out here that please do not do this. If this scenario, however, does happen, and say 99% of all humans ended themselves, the remaining 1% of non-conformists would prevent a total human extinction. So, in the end, I will give it a 9.5 out of 10. I don't think everyone on Earth could be brainwashed to succumb to such belief, though humanity will get a massive reset. Assimilation with alien race. Unlike a full-on alien invasion, this scenario proposes that aliens instead merge with Homo sapiens, ending with us either becoming one with the alien race or becoming a fully new race of alien-human hybrids. I could see this happening with some sort of alien microorganism that interacts with humans and slowly alters us over generations and generations of evolution, rendering Homo sapiens extinct. Alternatively, this could happen when an alien civilization contacts us and forces us to intermingle with them to establish some sort of alien outpost on Earth. Either way, as legendary author Arthur C. Clarke famously said, quote, "Two possibilities exist. Either we are alone in the universe, or we are not. Both are equally terrifying." Even if the aliens aren't necessarily malevolent, it would still mark the end of humanity as a species. Of course, mean everything that was created by humans would be rendered useless, obsolete. Everything from art, history, or even things like emotion would be gone. The caveat to all of this, however, is the sheer distance between one galaxy to another, and the vast nothingness of space makes space travel between two places incredibly difficult and long. Besides, we have not seen any evidence of alien life in the universe, but this does not, of course, necessarily mean they don't exist. I've explored a lot of possibilities to the Fermi paradox in my latest upload, and I highly recommend you to check it out if you are into aliens and cosmic horror. In any case, I will rate this entry a 5 out of 10. While yes, this would mean the end of Homo sapiens as a species, the sheer likelihood of any of this even conceivably happening is too low due to the vast amounts of space separating one planet containing life with another. It would be like hitting a dart arrow from kilometers away, basically never happening. Global dimming. Similar to the volcanic winter entry from whatever tier that was, this is talking about trends scientists saw in the 1950s to 1980s. During this time, it was observed that due to industrial pollution, sunlight was not able to enter Earth's atmosphere as much and thus caused global temperatures to drop. Estimates show that sunlight entering Earth's surface dropped as much as 5% per decade from 1950 to the 1980s and caused widespread ecological shifts. In fact, it may have drastically impacted rainfall globally and might have contributed to the 1984 Ethiopian famine, which had taken 1.2 million lives and affected 7.5 million people. While Earth's climate has shifted many times throughout its lifespan, this cooling was exclusively caused by humans, mainly because of industries recklessly pumping highly environmentally damaging chemicals into the air, which only hardly break down. Since the 1990s, governments around the globe collectively banned the most toxic of these chemicals over time, and have since then mostly reversed the effects of global dimming. While some parts of the environment have not fully recovered, this trend is now called global brightening. Because of this dimming, it has sadly masked the effect of global warming on the Earth, likely contributing to the widespread skepticism present today. Assuming the shift toward clean emissions, which are of course still very dirty, did not happen in the 1990s, what would Earth look like today? Most of the gases emitted during this time were similar to that, or the exact same as, once spewed forth by massive volcanic eruptions. Therefore, we don't need to look far or make any leaps of faith. I've covered this earlier up the iceberg, but I'll quickly recap. These emissions would block out most of the sunlight, though unlike volcanic ash, it would take much more time to do so. But assuming there is enough, global temperatures would drop by several degrees. Even a seemingly small change like 2 degrees Celsius or 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit has massive consequences on not only the sensitive ecosystems like coral reefs or rainforests, but also us humans. Quote, human-made aerosols with greatest effect on climate are products of fossil fuel burning and biofuels like firewood. Most aerosols increase reflection of incoming sunlight back to space and thus have a global cooling effect. Aerosol offset of greenhouse gas warming is a Faustian bargain, that is, a bargain providing present benefit without regard to the future consequences. The aerosols providing a cooling benefit are also inherently dangerous. Particulate air pollution responsible today for several million annual deaths by respiratory, cardiovascular, and even neurological diseases worldwide. Thus, as global pollution control has improved and clean energies are introduced, the cooling effect of aerosols is lost. In addition to the obvious health risks of these pollutants, the change in global temperature would impact us much more than we think. While we wouldn't necessarily freeze, we would definitely starve. Global breadbasket regions would output less grain and thus cause a global food shortage, impacting countries most reliant on food imports the greatest. It cannot be understated how delicately balanced our world really is. One tiny domino falling could have massive consequences down the line. Thus, if pollution control failed or we ignored its risks, society could realistically collapse and billions would die. Though total extinction is unlikely, it would be a certain civilizational reset button. 8 out of 10. Antinatalism, kinda similar to demographic meltdown and impotence entry, with some psychological component mixed in. Antinatalism, if you don't know, is the belief that it is unethical, unjust to give birth to another human. The belief goes like this: life is inherently evil. We have all experienced bad moments in life, and we all will experience a time in life where you would just rather do anything else. Sometimes life breaks you down, or as Ernest Hemingway said, quote, "The world breaks down everyone," or as Nietzsche wrote, "To live is to suffer." In other words, life is suffering and it outweighs the potential pleasure life can give. Secondly, antinatalists say that because no one is born with consent of their parents, creating life is a violation of autonomy, an unconsensual act that just piles more suffering onto that person. Thirdly, the absence of suffering is good. The absence of pleasure is not necessarily bad unless someone deprived you of it. Therefore, if you are never born, you never experience suffering, while not necessarily feeling bad because you don't feel pleasure. And finally, the amount of harm humans inflict on the earth is too great. Therefore, in order to minimize suffering and harm, it is better for a person to never be born. Thus, they can never inflict or experience any suffering. There are many communities around the globe who believe it is better to never have been, and that human life is inherently evil and suffering. Most notably, the activist group Voluntary Human Extinction Movement characterizes this act as a form of altruism toward the environment, using the slogan, "May we live long and die out," promoting a world where the Earth is finally freed from human exploitation. Essentially, many anti-natalists believe humans are a scourge, a parasite on the Earth, and it is better for us to never have existed, since we have caused so much harm and destruction to our planet. Some are more moderate though, and simply do not choose to have kids, but don't think humans are inherently evil. The likelihood of all humans being gripped by this belief is, well, less than likely. It is a programmed, instinctual biological drive to reproduce, and erasing that from our psyche is basically impossible. It is simply hard-coded into every living being's DNA to procreate, to give life. It is far, far more likely we will go extinct via some external disaster or self-inflicted violence, like nuclear war, than a global agreement to stop having babies. I cannot see that happening. 0 out of 10. Importantly, the quotes I mentioned earlier are not the full ones. Quote, "The world breaks down everyone, and afterward many are strong at the broken places. And to live is to suffer, to survive is to find some meaning in the suffering." Or as Teddy Roosevelt said, "Never throughout history has a man who lived a life of ease left a name worth remembering." So keep going. Even if you are at rock bottom, there's only one way to go, and that's up. Object from the Kuiper Belt. The Kuiper Belt is a massive collection of icy debris and rocky asteroids way beyond Neptune's orbit. This is where Pluto, our former 9th planet, and many other dwarf planets are currently orbiting. Because the Kuiper Belt is so distant to us, it is hard to detect and track a Kuiper Belt object racing toward us, unlike, say, an object in the relatively close main asteroid belt. Sometimes the orbits from our planets nudge these Kuiper Belt objects out of their comfort zone and thus race into our solar system before showing up on our radars when they are already relatively close to us. Because they are so far out, they arrive with much more momentum, turning a 10-kilometer wide ice ball into a strike equivalent to billions of megatons of TNT, able to wipe out most life off the face of the Earth. I've already covered an asteroid impact and a collision with a larger object like Nibiru in the previous parts, so keep it short. An asteroid the size of multiple kilometers is able to make humanity go extinct easily, and even a smaller sized object hitting the Earth can trigger a global winter, causing an agricultural collapse and the death of potentially billions. The problem with an object this far out is that we have no time to prepare for the inevitable. It will just arrive, and we would not be able to do anything about it. Good news is that there is technology being developed trying to deflect asteroids and shield us from a devastating strike, wiping us out. Another good thing is that we have mapped out most of the objects in the Kuiper Belt, especially the bigger ones, and we can predict their orbits. So while an object flying off course and hitting Earth is technically possible, their likelihood is astronomically low and would require some change in the gravity acting on the Kuiper Belt. Gravity would have to tug very hard for anything to radically change over there. But yes, a large asteroid from that far away would functionally end humanity. Depending on its size, of course. 10 out of 10. It would statistically never happen in the next few thousand years. Until then, we probably have some technology to fully nullify these threats and shield us from them. Om Shinrikyo cult. Ooh, what a rabbit hole to get into. This honestly deserves its own video, so I'll try to condense it as much as I can. Maybe I will cover this in a future project, so let me know if you would like to see that. Aleph, more well known as their former name, Om Shinrikyo, is a Japanese cult founded in 1987 by Shoko Asahara. The cult's beliefs are very strange, to say the least. Asahara drew from Buddhism, Hinduism, Christianity, and the belief of Nostradamus, as well as millenarianism, which is the belief that there will be some sort of societal transition after which all things will be changed. Asahara portrayed himself as Christ and the Lamb of God, being Japan's only enlightened human, and sought to take on all the sins of his followers, taking away all of it and their bad deeds. Asahara predicted a massive nuclear war would start in 1997, where the US, which Asahara called the Beast from the Book of Revelation, would strike Japan, and World War III would devastate devastate the Earth, these end times would only be survived by these few elites who joined the cult. Orm originally grew out of a yoga club and quietly gained followers, though it was, at the very start, already controversial in Japan. Nonetheless, the cult grew and advertised itself with claims of curing diseases, positive thinking, increase of intellect, and more. While we don't know exactly what the practices were, insiders allege Orm practiced harmless techniques like yoga, to taking hallucinogenics like LSD, to being hung upside down, to being exposed to shock therapy. Orm believed the end times were coming and had very extreme and dehumanizing views on society. They mostly forced members to stay and were able to recruit soldiers and paramilitarists, making them one of the fastest growing religions in Japan at the time. As you can imagine, the leader was pretty charismatic and had a tight grip. At the end of 1993, Orm began testing the incredibly toxic sarin gas on a sheep ranch in the middle of Australia, which they had gotten a hold of through secret contacts. The cult is mostly known for their 1995 attack on a Tokyo subway with sarin, which caused the death of 13 commuters and seriously injuring 54, so some estimates go as high as saying 6,000 people were affected by this attack. Over the next few years, investigations showed more acts were done by the cult, but I won't get into them here. The cult still exists today, just under the name Aleph, and is deemed a terrorist organization in many countries today. However, it is deemed pretty much defunct nowadays. Alright, that's the backstory. Would humanity go extinct if Aum Shinrikyo got a hold of more deadly toxins or viruses? Probably not, no. Though the threat of a suicide cult appearing and genetically developing a virus with modern technology is theoretically possible. It is a persistent threat known as bioterrorism. In all technicality, this would be a 0 out of 10. Assuming a similar cult like Aum comes around and develops a virus like this, it would be a devastating civilization-ending scenario, killing most of humanity in waves, causing the end of modern-day society. 9.5 out of 10. Moon gets destroyed. Pretty much self-explanatory. The real question is how it would be destroyed. If the moon were to be destroyed in a massive, high-velocity impact, such as a rogue planet-sized object or a massive comet, the resulting debris would not simply float away into the vastness of space, but due to how gravity works, this debris will be caught in Earth's gravity and fall down to us. This will cause a massive shower and would probably lead to the death of all life on Earth. It would be akin to the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs, but multiple times over. Not only the sheer amount of mass bombarding Earth like asteroids, but also the climatic impact this would have from the dust and debris being thrown into the atmosphere would make humanity go virtually extinct. But even if the moon disappeared in one clean destruction, it would not change the fact the moon dictates Earth's tides. This I covered in another entry further up the iceberg, so I will be mostly repeating myself here. A moonless Earth would experience tides of roughly a third of its current strength, mainly impacting marine ecosystems that rely on the tides, but it would lead to overall changes in the environment. Additionally, the moon keeps Earth's tilt at a stable 23.5 degrees. Without a moon, Earth's tilt would wobble over tens of thousands of years, swinging widely from a tilt of 0 degrees to as much as 85 degrees, effectively turning our planet on its side. One hemisphere would therefore experience a permanent winter, the other a permanent summer. This, in turn, would be devastating for us humans and ecosystems as well. Society would have to migrate to the equator, where it would be the most bearable, while life at the poles would become extremely inhospitable. Seasons would become non-existent, since they are reliant on Earth's tilt being the way it is right now. No more summers and winters. The loss of tides will cause Earth to spin faster, potentially shortening the length of a day. It is not clear how much it would shorten the day by, but it may affect ecosystems around the globe as well. This specific scenario, however, would likely take tens of thousands of years to fully affect the planet, since the axial tilt wobbles ever so slightly over millennia. It would be a slow burner, but something that would certainly cause widespread destruction. Surprisingly though, life would go on, and humanity may survive this. The existence of a moon is not a requirement for life to exist, so we could persevere, though it would kill a lot of people nonetheless. I will rate this entry in two ways. The moon being destroyed in a dirty way, that is, colliding with a massive body like mentioned earlier, would certainly mean the end of us, so 10 out of 10. A clean destruction, however, is survivable, although hard. 5 out of 10. I hypercane. A hypercane is a hypothetical, extreme tropical cyclone that represents the theoretical upper limit of a hurricane's power. Thus, hypercane. They were first proposed by MIT meteorologist Kerry Emanuel in his 1995 paper on the upper limits on hurricanes. Quote, "We proposed that, in some cases, the missing link of mass extinctions in Earth's history may be provided by hypercanes, runaway hurricanes that are capable of injecting mass amounts of water and aerosols into the middle and upper stratosphere, where they may have profound effects on atmospheric chemistry and radiative transfer. These extreme hurricanes could only form when oceanic temperatures exceed a threshold of around 50 degrees Celsius or 122 degrees Fahrenheit. For reference, a typical hurricane can form with water temperatures of around 26.5 degrees Celsius or 80 degrees Fahrenheit, and the warmest ocean temperature ever recorded is 38 degrees Celsius or 100 degrees Fahrenheit. The only way such temperatures could be reached is if a large external force applied it, otherwise it would never happen naturally. It is theorized that mass extinctions in Earth's history may have been partially caused by hypercanes, like the extinction that killed the dinosaurs. While the asteroid was the main perpetrator, the sheer amount of heat it applied to the oceans is believed to have spawned one, if not multiple hypercanes. No evidence has been found yet. A supervolcano erupting, flood basalts forming under the water, or global warming reaching a critical level could also spawn hypercanes. Simulations show hypercanes could reach wind speeds of at least 800 kilometers an hour or 500 miles per hour. That is almost double the fastest wind speed ever recorded on Barrow Island, Australia, which was capable of lifting houses off their foundations, uprooting trees, and violently tossing cars around. A wind speed double that would be catastrophic, to say the least. It's hard to say what would happen, but it could easily level entire cities, leaving nothing behind other than a massive path of destruction. And this hypercane would not be a small, violent storm. It could easily reach the size of an entire continent. It is estimated it could cover all of North America, featuring an eye of 250 kilometers or 150 miles wide, and spawning storm surges of 18 meters or 60 feet high, ravaging coastal regions worldwide. Hypercanes are insanely tall, easily reaching into the middle stratosphere, 40 kilometers or 25 miles up. The sheer debris and material it would throw into the atmosphere would likely cause damage to the ozone layer, exposing us to DNA-damaging UV radiation after the dust settles, and the amount of hot water it would throw around could perhaps start another hypercane. Hypercane begets hypercane. This damage would be localized to one hemisphere at the very least, causing the end of society to that area. If we are lucky enough and another hypercane is not formed by the amount of heat generated, humanity could survive this carnage. If we aren't, well, it doesn't look very promising to us. Once again, 2 ratings for this one. 5.5 for a localized hypercane and 10 out of 10 for multiple ones. Earth changes. I have no idea what this could be referring to. This could be literally anything pertaining to the environment, like climate change, solidifying Earth's core, or whatever, really. So I think I'll skip it, rather than trying to crack a code. Kinetic orbital strike. Although it seems like a science fiction entry, this is a very real concept. It is the hypothetical act of launching a large object from space and letting gravity do its work. The concept originated in the Cold War and envisioned satellites that orbit the Earth to always carry tungsten rods as magazines, and when ordered, to release them in times of war, famously referred to as rods from God. The projectiles, as the name implies, purely rely on kinetic energy rather than explosives. Therefore, no additional energy is needed. It's essentially just pure metal being dropped from very high up. Gravity does its job and converts the potential energy into massive kinetic energy, which is then released as thermal energy when entering Earth's atmosphere. In the real world, these rods from God never left the planning room and were only used experimentally, though tungsten rods 6 meters by 0.3 meters or 20 feet by 1 foot large would carry enough energy as roughly 11 to 15 tons of TNT. This would vaporize anything within a few meters and punch a hole much deeper. Such a rod would damage buildings within a few hundred meters, potentially as much as a mile in radius. This damage is akin to a small nuclear weapon being dropped, and a rod can reach every major city on Earth within 15 minutes, similar to a nuke. Importantly, these rods are not designed to destroy as much area as possible, but rather penetrate a location very deep, such as large underground bunkers or heavily fortified locations. While one rod is pretty harmless on a global scale, a coordinated launch of thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of rods could flatten every major industrial hub within minutes and could render governments worldwide useless. In comparison to a nuclear bomb, rods from God would not leave behind any radioactive material and thus no nuclear fallout. However, the sheer volume of dust and debris being thrown around would be flung up into the atmosphere and could stay there for years, causing a nuclear winter without the nuclear part. Additionally, the velocity of this debris could damage or even destroy the very satellites they were launched from, potentially encasing Earth in a coat of high-speed space debris. This is actually a very big deal, even today, since it could render any future attempt at space exploration impossible due to the damage rockets could take while launching. These rods would be very hard to defend against, being essentially invisible on modern radars, and it could thus prove very useful at taking a critical position out before a retaliatory strike can be initiated. However, the reason why you don't see these weapons today is very simple: they're impractical. Why would you want to launch giant tungsten rods from space, which you have to carry there in the first place, when you can just launch them in traditional ways, or just use a large bomb instead? There is very little reason to even use these, leading to popular media taking inspiration, especially science fiction authors. A doomsday scenario with rods from God wiping out humanity would be pretty unlikely. You would need an unimaginable amount of rods to wipe out every human off the Earth. I'm not even sure if there's enough tungsten in the world to do so. Someone should calculate that. But yes, I don't think it could wipe out humanity. A nuclear war would be far, far more likely, effective, cheaper, and faster. 2 out of 10. GM crops. Genetically modified crops are crops that are, well, genetically modified for one specific purpose. Usually this is to resist some parasite or to increase overall yields. Today, farmers globally rely on high-yield patented GM strains, but if, by accident, scientists genetically modify a plant in such a way that it resists currently known pathogens and is already not resisted by crops, it could lead to a scenario where this runaway plant with incredible genes spreads uncontrollably and rapidly. This scenario is similar to the Grey Goose scenario from Tier 3, where runaway nanorobots ravage and devour everything in their sight, but instead of nanorobots, it would be a plant attacking other plants, named Green Goo. A runaway superplant would usher in a catastrophic downfall to agriculture worldwide, as our previously resistant plants would be devoured without any chance to fight against it. It would spread like a virus, eventually taking over every single plant on the planet and replacing them with copies of itself. There would thus be no more crop diversity and ecosystems, and food chains would collapse almost instantly, as animals reliant on certain plant species would starve. The chance of this happening is pretty low, but theoretically possible to happen at some point. Therefore, billions of people are at risk of the consequences of the global agriculture collapse, starting a massive famine and a collapse of modern industrial society. However, we have prepared multiple seed banks around the globe in case global agriculture ceases to function properly. Most notably, the Svalbard Seed Vault in the Arctic contains over 1.3 million samples of seeds from across the globe, representing around 13,000 years of agricultural history, and conserving them in times of famine, war, mismanagement, or in this case, genetic modification. There are a handful of other seed vaults across the globe, like in Peru, South Korea, Nigeria, or the Philippines, each of them housing valuable samples for crop diversity. I highly doubt such a GM crop would be the end of humanity. Billions of people would starve due to the subsequent famines, wars, and overall chaos raging, but full extinction is unlikely. Humans have always been highly adaptable, and small pockets of biodiverse ecosystems could survive in especially remote regions of the world, being a biological lifeboat for the survivors. Perhaps humans will go underground in subterranean bases and rebuild society there, with their non-GM crops in hands, to rebuild society once again. I reckon upwards of 90% of the global population would perish, but not 100%, which is why I'm giving this an 8.5 out of 10. Not quite enough to end us completely. Y chromosome extinction. If you've paid attention in biology class, the Y chromosome dictates an animal species is biologically male. If you have two X chromosomes, you are a biological woman, one X and one Y, and you are biologically male. In evolutionary history, the Y chromosome has always been in a state of genetic decay. 166 million years ago, the Y chromosome had the same number of genes as the X chromosome, with roughly 900 genes. Today, the Y chromosome has a puny 45 active genes. Without getting too much into the biology of it all, the Y chromosome is essentially alone and cannot efficiently repair mutations or purge genetic trash, leading to an inevitable downward spiral of gene loss. There are two theories as to how the Y chromosome will evolve in the next few million years. The persistent Y theory posits that no more genes will decay and has instead reached a stable equilibrium because it has all the remaining genes essential for survival. Therefore, human males will not go extinct. The wimpy Y theory posits the exact opposite. It argues that genes will keep decaying till the entire chromosome is destined for deletion. Australian geneticist Jennifer Ann Marshall Graves warned, quote, "The human Y chromosome is running out of time. In the last 300 million years, it has lost 1,093 of its original 1,438 genes, and at this rate, it will lose the last 45 in a mere 10 million years. There has been a proposal that perhaps a rescue is at hand in the form of recently discovered gene conversion. However, I argue that although conversion will increase the frequency of variation of the Y between Y chromosomes in a population, it will not lead to a drive towards a more functional Y. The forces of evolution have made the Y a genetically isolated, non-recombining entity, vulnerable to genetic drift and selection for favorable new variants, sharing the Y with damaging mutations. Perhaps it will even speed up the decline of the Y chromosome and the onset of a new round of sex chromosome differentiation. The struggle to preserve males may perhaps lead to hominid speciation. While this sounds pretty bad on paper, life is notoriously good at adapting and finding workarounds. For example, some species of rodents like the umami spiny rat have already lost their Y chromosomes and evolved new mechanisms to determine biological maleness. Who is to say we would not develop the same or similar mechanisms? Nothing really. Life finds a way. Even if life does not, we can prevent this apocalypse by essentially moving away the genes from the Y chromosome to other places via genetic modification, preserving the male sex that way. Considering this apocalypse takes millions of years at the very least to occur, we will likely have developed some sort of technology to preserve the male sex, and if we haven't, then life will have found a way. But yes, if the Y chromosome were to disappear right now, humans would no longer be able to reproduce, leading to the biological extinction of man. The amount of time this takes, though, makes it basically impossible and a non-factor, really. 1 out of 10. Heaven's Gate occultism. Again, a huge rabbit hole to get into. I will try my best to condense it as much as I can, so bear with me. For those who haven't heard about them, Heaven's Gate was an American cult founded in 1974 by Marshall Applewhite and Bonnie Nettles, known as Doe and T, and their cult, respectively. Their theology was a weird concoction of Christianity, 1970s science fiction, New Age beliefs, millenarianism, and ufology. Yes, ufology, which is the belief in extraterrestrials and communication between them. Importantly, they believed in the theory that extraterrestrial astronauts visited Earth in a distant past and had a profound impact on human history. Quote, "Aliens planted the seeds of current humanity millions of years ago and have to come to reap the harvest of their work in the form of spiritually evolved individuals who will join the ranks of the flying saucer crews. Only a select few members of humanity will be chosen to advance to this transhuman state. The rest will be left to wallow in the spiritually poisoned atmosphere of a corrupt world. Only the members believing in the Heaven's Gate cult and the ones making sacrifices will be taken to the quote-unquote next level. The next level was their concept of an afterlife, where their soul will be taken aboard a spaceship to a place full of eternal bliss. They believed their bodies were mere vessels for their souls, and the goal of life was to shed every earthly possession from themselves, everything that made them human: family, friends, gender, sexuality, individuality, jobs, money, and their physical possessions needed to be given up for the ascension, known as the quote-unquote the evolutionary level above human, or Tila. This would be the place of eternal bliss, where humans would absorb sunlight as their sustenance and do not have intercourse, or anything that makes humans inherently mammalian. The arrival of the Hale-Bopp comet in 1997 served as their closing window of opportunity to ascend to this next level. The group believed the spacecraft picking them up was waiting in the comet's tail for their souls. This led to the mass suicide of 39 members on March 26, 1997, or as the official website says to this day, quote, Hale-Bopp brings closure to Heaven's Gate. Our 22 years of classroom here on planet Earth is finally coming to conclusion. Graduation from the human evolutionary level. We are happily prepared to leave this world and go with T's crew. In the context of this iceberg, I assume this is referring to Heaven's Gate's belief spreading globally. It's important to mention that the cult does not, as far as I can tell, have any beliefs of the end of the world incoming, some sort of doomsday prophecy in and of themselves, from which they are escaping from. They are merely ascending while the others are stuck on Earth forever, so I guess this is similar to the mass suicide entry from the last year. As I said previously, the drive towards self-destruction is not a natural one, and is impossible to biologically render humanity extinct. At most, it would cause localized tragedies, but humanity would go on. And assuming 99% of humanity does get whipped by this thought, the remaining 1%, which is still a lot of people, would be able to rebuild society from scratch. 9.5 out of 10. Cthulhu Armageddon. You have likely heard of Cthulhu, the mythical being coined by legendary horror writer H.P. Lovecraft, the literal father of cosmic horror. Note that I haven't read any of his works, so I'll try my best to get everything right. Forgive me if I get stuff wrong. In essence, there is a sunken city of Riley, where a pantheon of ancient powerful gods from space reside, known as the Great Old Ones. That pantheon is pretty loose in Lovecraft's writing, but there have been attempts over the decades to form a coherent mythos, and has thus been expanded upon a bunch. Lovecraft describes these old ones, quote, these great old ones were not composed altogether of flesh and blood. They had shape, but that shape was not made of matter. When the stars were right, they could plunge from world to world through the sky, but when the stars were wrong, they could not live. But although they no longer lived, they would never really die. They all lay in stone houses in their great city of Riley, preserved by the spells of mighty Cthulhu for a glorious resurrection when the stars and the earth might once more be ready for them. But at that time, some force from outside must serve to liberate their bodies. The spells that preserved them intact likewise prevented them from making an initial move, and they could only lie awake in the dark and think whilst uncounted millions of years rolled by. They knew all that was occurring in the universe, but their mode of speech was transmitted thought. Even now they talked in their tombs. When, after infinities of chaos, the first men came, the great old ones spoke to the sensitive among them by molding their dreams, for only thus could their language reach the fleshy minds of mammals. The doomsday, however, starts with the rising of the sunken city, triggered by a planetal alignment, allowing the great old ones to slip back into our world, including the water deity Cthulhu. Quote, then the liberated old ones would teach them new ways to shout and kill and revel and enjoy themselves, and all the earth would flame with a holocaust of ecstasy and freedom. It's not really clear how this would all unfold, since Lovecraft left a lot to the reader's imagination, a brilliant way to do it, to be fair. However, this would quite literally be the end of the world, alien creatures of unimaginable proportions that do not make sense in our three-dimensional world, roaming our planet and causing destruction and havoc as they pass, reshaping the planet to suit their needs. This would eventually cause the death of any life, leaving Earth a barren, alien husk as they move on to other planets, leaving no record that humanity ever existed. Though in the Cthulhu Armageddon literature, small pockets of humanity still survive in New England, fighting a losing battle against mutated alien hybrids in a permanent dark age with no hope of ever winning. So yeah, pretty gloomy stuff, but that's Lovecraftian horror for you. 10 out of 10. It would be the ultimate, absolute ceiling of hopelessness, a scenario where death would be the preferable option to living in a world with these eldritch beings. Giant molecular clouds. A giant molecular cloud is a cold, dense and opaque interstellar cloud of mainly hydrogen gas and trace dusts. When these giant clouds of gas collapse in on themselves, they can create new stars, giving them the name stellar nurseries. They are very dark and cold, which is why we cannot see them with visible light and rely on infrared and radio instead. Some of these clouds are very wide, often hundreds of light years across, and occasionally our galaxy passes through these dense clouds. While this is very dense in cosmic terms, it is still nothing compared to Earth's atmosphere, which is trillions of times more dense than these clouds. In fact, it is assumed we have passed through these clouds in the past, as recently as 2 million years ago. Quote, a passage through a cloud that is a few thousand times denser than the diffuse interstellar medium locally would have dramatically compressed the heliosphere, the region filled by the solar wind, which is bound by the pressure of the surrounding interstellar gas. The shrinkage of the heliopause to a scale smaller than the Earth's orbit around the Sun implies that the Earth could have been temporarily exposed to an enhanced flux of cosmic rays. Assuming the heliosphere is compressed by these clouds, which there currently is not much evidence for, things would likely not be much out of the ordinary. We would probably see a larger influx of cosmic rays and hydrogen atoms, perhaps reducing the visibility of objects outside the solar system, but that's about it. Keep in mind, space is incredibly empty. Like 99.9% of space is literal emptiness, so a cloud being much denser than the average interstellar space is not saying much. 0 out of 10. Nothing would really happen. There's no risk involved as far as we know. Blacked up polar caps. I assume this is referring to the phenomenon of cryoconite, which are these small dark pockets in ice that are usually made up of soot, dust or ash. When they are created, the ice beneath melts due to the reduced albedo, which is the reflectivity of the ice. Thus, more light is absorbed and melting is accelerated. While small amounts of these cryoconites aren't a problem at all, in fact, they act as small ecosystems in of themselves. Large areas of ice covered by cryoconites are a problem. If a certain threshold of ice loss is reached, the surface area of the ice is reduced, leading to reduced albedo and increased absorption of sunlight, leading to more ice being molten. Essentially, at some point, the ice loss cannot be controlled any longer, and the entire area will be devoid of any ice. Cryoconites, as said earlier, are mainly made up of soot and dust. They are a pretty new phenomenon, only really being discovered after much of the world had undergone industrialization. Therefore, if we do not keep our greenhouse gas emissions under control and more pollutants are pumped into the air, glaciers might develop more cryoconites and thus blacken them, leading to more ice loss. I don't really get why this is so low, considering this is essentially just a side effect of global warming, but I digress. I don't think I need to explain why the loss of glaciers is a problem. Right? Rising sea levels, coastal cities and island nations being ravaged, more extreme weather, the largest migration crisis in human history, yada yada. You get the point. The list goes on and on. So in the end, the blackening of our polar caps is not really the problem here. It is global warming as a whole. So I'm rating it the same way as the global warming entry from tier 1, that is an 8.5 out of 10. Gliese 710. Gliese 710 is an orange-ish dwarf star, around 60% of the mass of our Sun, which is expected to be on a collision course with our solar system's gravitational boundaries. It is traveling at approximately 51,500 km per hour or 32,000 miles per hour and will make its closest approach in around 1.3 million years from now, passing within a mere 0.16 light years of Earth. This is close enough to penetrate the outer Oort cloud, which is comprised of billions of small icy comets. Gliese's gravity will therefore likely perturb the Oort cloud to such a degree that it will hurl millions of small rocky bodies to the outer and inner solar system for millions of years. Estimates show that it will trigger a comet shower with the densities of around 10 comets per year for around 3 to 4 million years. While a lot of these bodies will be deflected by the larger planets like Jupiter or Saturn, it is more than likely that Earth will be bombarded by a factor of 10 or more. So rather than a civilization-ending asteroid, like the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs happening once every 100 million years, it is possible such an asteroid could hit Earth once every few thousand years. Additionally, the star would be bright enough to see with the naked eye, potentially outshining Mars on a good night. However, considering the fact this will not be happening for at least another million years, humanity will probably survive this upcoming apocalypse. We have already successfully used technology to slow down asteroids asteroids, so it is plausible that in the future humans will develop some advanced way to fully deflect or entirely destroy incoming asteroids, shielding us from potential extinction. We have ample time to prepare, 0 out of 10, for the specific scenario. Assuming, however, LISA 710 arrives today, we would be no match for the relentless asteroid shower hitting our planet, lasting millions of years. In this case, humanity and life as a whole is guaranteed to be wiped off the face of the planet. Blood moon prophecies. While pretty vague, blood moons have always been a staple for prophecies and theories in human history. A blood moon is really just a name for a total lunar eclipse, an event where the moon passes through the Earth's shadow. While in this shadow, Earth's atmosphere filters out blue light and makes the moon look blood red. Several civilizations throughout history understood this event as either a good or a bad omen. Too many to get into here. I am, however, assuming this entry refers to the specific blood moon prophecies propagated by preachers John Hagee and Mark Blitz related to the lunar eclipses between 2014 to 2015. Starting on April 15th, 2014, there was a total lunar eclipse, the first of 4 consecutive total eclipses, known as a tetrad. The second one took place on October 8th, 2014, the third on April 4th, 2015, and the fourth on September 28th, 2015. A blood moon, being the sign of the beginning of the end times, originates in the book of Joel in the Old Testament. In Joel 2:31 it says, quote, "The sun will turn into darkness and the moon into blood before the great and terrible day of the Lord comes." The same verse was repeated in Acts 2:20, and a blood moon was mentioned in the book of Revelation as well. Quote, "A long white robe was given to each of them. They were told that they should rest yet for a while until their fellow servants and their brothers, who would also be killed even as they were, should complete their course. I saw when he opened the 6th seal, and there was a great earthquake. The sun became black as sackcloth made of hair, and the whole moon became as blood." Importantly, these blood moons coincided with important Jewish holidays, prompting a lot of people to inquire about the prophecy of blood moons in the Bible. While it isn't entirely clear what happens, the appearance of a blood moon in the Bible vaguely warns about the upcoming end times and the call for repentance rather than one massive event. But of course, the world did not end at 2015, so interpreting a blood moon as a signal for the end times has been criticized numerous times. In the context of the iceberg, the event itself would pose no threat. It is just an astronomical and visual anomaly, and it has been documented for millennia. The social and psychological impact of such a doomsday prophecy being propagated could, however, cause some localized chaos or panic, so in that sense, it could potentially cause some deaths. But full-on human extinction is basically impossible. 0 out of 10. Quantum vacuum chain reaction, post-vacuum decay, and quantum vacuum collapse. Now, from what I can tell, these entries are all referring to the same event, where our universe is locally in a stable energy state, but sits at a higher energy level than the true global minimum. I don't know if I'm getting something wrong here, so please correct me down below if you think I made a mistake lumping these together. Without getting too much into the physics of it all, since it is quite complex, it works like this. When you think of a vacuum, you probably think of empty space, something that contains nothing, no matter, no particles, no nothing. In reality, however, these spaces in fact do contain something, that being electromagnetic waves in tiny particles popping in and out of existence in the vacuum state. And you may know that in the universe, things want to take the path of least resistance. In other words, things want to go from a higher energy level to a lower one. Things equal out over time. This applies to everything in the universe and is inevitable. Alright. So what does that mean? If a vacuum is truly devoid of energy, it is considered a true vacuum. If it does not contain this global minimum of energy and can actually go lower than its current level, then it is a false vacuum. The reason these false vacuums could exist is because they are locally stable. In a small area, they are indeed true vacuums, but in cosmic terms, they are not. They are false. We assume we are indeed in a true vacuum, but this needn't be the case. The universe likely could contain false vacuum states. If these do, by chance, exist, they would create cosmic bubbles which would spread outward at the speed of light and transform the other false vacuums into true ones, setting off a chain reaction where every quantum state is at its energy minimum. This would break down the fundamental constants of physics as we currently know them. It would likely mean the entire universe would be torn to shreds case, like the big rip scenario I mentioned a tier or two earlier, quote, "The possibility that we are living in a false vacuum has never been a cheering one to contemplate. Vacuum decay is the ultimate ecological catastrophe. In the new vacuum, there are new constants of nature. After vacuum decay, not only is life as we know it impossible, so is chemistry as we know it. Nonetheless, one could always draw stoic comfort from the possibility that perhaps over time the new vacuum would sustain, if not life as we know it, at least some structures capable of knowing joy. This possibility has now been eliminated." The problem with this scenario is that it would be unstoppable. No bunker deep enough, no shield thick enough, and no distance far enough to escape the restructuring of the fabric of reality itself. There would be no escape, as the bubble expands and turns everything into shreds. The probability of this conceivably happening are astronomically low, but theoretically possible. Perhaps they are already out there, coming for us, and we wouldn't know for a long time. 10 out of 10, the absolute end of any life as we know it. Vern shot. First proposed by geophysicist Jason Phipps Morgan in his 2004 paper on mass extinctions in Earth's history, he laid forth the hypothesis that they are caused by internal supereruptions. Don't get the wrong idea though, I don't mean volcanoes, I'm referring to Vern shots, named after French author Jules Verne. He theorized that, because mass extinction events seem to happen periodically, which has been chalked up to be coincidences in mainstream science, perhaps another natural process is responsible for these extinctions. Morgan suggested massive plumes form in the Earth's crust and reach kilometers down, perhaps even to the very core of the Earth. These plumes are made of mainly carbon dioxide and sulfur dioxide, building up but contained by thick layers of continental crust. At some point, the pressure is too great and the crust collapses, spewing forth a massive beam of gas and rock vertically into the atmosphere. Essentially, it would be like one of those videos of Mentos reacting with Coke, just thousands of times greater and more powerful. Now, no real evidence has been found of these events occurring, but they could potentially be the cause of mass extinctions, but likely are not the main reason. Further up the iceberg, I mentioned the flood basalt events being the reason for many extinctions throughout Earth's history. Likely, flood basalts were accompanied by Vern shots events, either before, during, or after the flood basalts had settled. If a Vern shot event were to happen today, the impact would likely not be as grave as it sounds. Of course, this depends on the size and the amount of pressure generated, but an event like this alone would not spark the end of humanity. Multiple ones simultaneously erupting, however, would be catastrophic. Quote, "The ecological effects of a Vern shot are those previously proposed for a continental flood basalt-induced mass extinction, with the only difference that a Vern shot event would be even more sudden. Multiple Vern shot events could also occur within a single phase of rifting. The massive amounts of carbon and sulfur vapor, propellant, released during the Vern shot considered above would instantaneously poison the atmosphere and the ocean's thin surface photosynthetic layer. This, along with the amount of debris spewed into the atmosphere, would mean a global cooling event, where global temperatures would drop by several degrees and would force humans to hide in bunkers for perhaps years at a time. It's unclear how this would affect us, but I am giving this entry a 6.5 out of 10, assuming multiple Vern shot eruptions occur at the very same time. Eternal hibernation. Hey, this actually refers to one of the theories I covered in another video I made a while back, but watch it if you're interested in some existential dread. Anyways, I believe this refers to the aestivation hypothesis. First laid out in a 2017 paper, it discussed the possibility that alien civilizations could willingly lay low and have a long nap in order to conserve energy. By the way, aestivating is the opposite of hibernating. It refers to the act of conserving energy in the summer instead of the winter. Some animals actually do this, by the way, but why would alien civilizations do this? Well, for very much the same reason animals do it here on Earth. On a cosmic timescale, the universe is pretty young and still relatively hot. In order to maximize their civilization's existence, the aliens would want to aestivate till it cools down further, so that they can maximize computation power. This doomsday scenario posits that we humans would be in the same shoes, collectively choosing as a civilization to aestivate and conserve energy till a better time comes. In the original theory, the civilization would wake up and make use of their energy at some point, but there are catches to this. What if, say, another rivaling civilization finds us and destroys the capabilities keeping us asleep? This would mean the end of humanity as a whole. Or Or what if some mechanical failures or unforeseen natural catastrophes destroy our planet? We would have no way of reacting to the changes in our environment and no way of knowing. Or, more grimly, what if we collectively forget we ever entered this great sleep in the first place? What if our simulation is so real, or more preferable to the actual reality, we never wake up, essentially locking ourselves in a matrix we created?
Why, Mr. Anderson? Why? Why do you persist? Because I choose to.
Of course, this is very speculative, and you can spin the scenario however you like. I will give this entry a 6 out of 10, theoretically possible, but let's be real, pretty unlikely. Cobalt bomb. Proposed by physicist Leo Szilard in 1950, the device works by replacing the material around a thermonuclear bomb with cobalt metal. When this bomb explodes from ordinary fusion, the cobalt would be transmuted into radioactive cobalt-60, which is vaporized by the explosion. This cobalt would then fall back to the Earth, mixed with the dust and debris from the explosion, contaminating the ground in a massive nuclear fallout. Ordinary fissile products, that being the radioactive material laying on the ground after an explosion, often do not last very long. Normal fissile products are most deadly in the first few weeks after an explosion, but return to relatively tolerable levels around half a year later. Cobalt-60 has a half-life of around 5.3 years, a time which is unfeasible to sustain large amounts of people for the vast majority of fallout shelters. Note that this does not mean it is safe to go outside after 5 years, it means it is half as radioactive, which is still deadly for any kind of life. Likely, the area would stay contaminated and intolerable for humans to enter for decades to come. People would have to stick to underground shelters for many years to wait out the deadly radiation outside. The bomb itself is, in fact, designed to maximize the lethality of the nuclear fallout. Of course, if multiple of those bombs are detonated across the globe, it will cause a nuclear winter, but you already know that, so I won't get into it. Decontamination of areas affected by cobalt bombs may be possible, but extremely expensive on large scales. These bombs essentially freeze the area in time, rendering it toxic for decades. While technically feasible for us, normal nuclear weapons are far cheaper and more practical at eliminating a rival power. Cobalt bombs, however, lay an entire area completely wasted for a long time before any kind of biological activity can occur there. 4 out of 10, but theoretically 10 out of 10. Mutually assured destruction. This I alluded to in the nuclear war entry from whatever tier that was, and I have covered in the Cold War Iceberg. You don't need to watch these to understand this entry, but I do recommend it. In essence, mutually assured destruction, or MAD, is a military doctrine developed at the very start of the Cold War, which posits that the full-scale use of nuclear weapons by an attacker will result in the retaliation of the defender, and thus a full-scale annihilation of both parties. In MAD, both sides have the capabilities to destroy each other via nukes, which was historically true between the Soviet Union and the United States, who both possessed, and partly still do, thousands of warheads which could be deployed in no time. If, say, the Soviet Union were to have attacked the United States via nukes, they could have retaliated with equal or greater force, which would have resulted in an escalating event where both powers keep firing warheads at each other till either side is completely destroyed. Therefore, both powers are disincentivized to launch a warhead in the first place because neither side wants to be annihilated completely. The result? A tense but stable global peace. Besides, the global impact of a nuclear war I don't think needs to be reiterated, so lots of collateral losses in neutral countries will occur. Importantly, the MAD doctrine does not prevent a conventional war, one that is not fought with nuclear weapons or guerrilla tactics or even cyber espionage attacks. It just prevents all-out nuclear war. Former US President Jimmy Carter put it this way, quote, "To continue to deter in an area of strategic nuclear equivalence, it is necessary to have nuclear, as well as conventional, forces such that in considering aggression against our interests, any adversary would recognize that no plausible outcome would represent a victory, or any plausible definition of victory. To this end, and so as to preserve the possibility of bargaining effectively to terminate the war on acceptable terms that are as favorable as practical, if deterrence fails initially, we must be capable of fighting successfully so that the adversary would not achieve his war aims and would suffer costs that are unacceptable or in any event greater than his gains from having initiated an attack." Today, Even though the Cold War ended officially more than 30 years ago, the doctrine continues to be applied today. Alright. So what if MAD failed during the Cold War? Or what if it fails to establish a stable global peace? The result will likely be the same. There are currently 12,500 nuclear warheads we know of today, split up between various countries across the globe. Modern missiles can reach pretty much every city on the planet within 30 minutes. Realistically, only a time frame of 15 minutes would be available to retaliate. If, within that window, a retaliatory strike is ordered and all the nukes were to be fired off, billions would likely die instantly from the immediate blasts. Those fortunate enough to survive in bunkers or subterranean bases would survive this, however would struggle to scrape by as the nuclear fallout settles and a nuclear winter envelops the planet, dropping temperatures by several degrees and making traditional agriculture impossible. It's hard to say how many would survive this, but it is safe to assume humanity will drop to less than 10,000 people, like in prehistoric times. It is possible humanity may persevere through this cataclysm, though it would set back humanity centuries, if not millennia, as modern society would cease to exist. 9.5 out of 10. The Big Crumble. No, this is not, in fact, talking about a chocolate chip cookie, but rather another way our universe could collapse. While you have likely heard of the Big Crunch or the Big Rip, the Big Crumble refers to the idea that the universe will not end in a big, massive event like an explosion or contraction, but by falling apart on the very atomic level. In essence, the constants of nature as we know them in the modern day may not actually be constant, while today it is assumed the fundamental constants of the universe stay the same across the universe and over time. Perhaps our methods of observing these constants are not accurate enough, and we thus have no proof of these constants being stable. They might as well not be. This means that over hundreds of billions, perhaps trillions of years in the distant future, the constants of nature, like the force of gravity, the speed of light in a vacuum, the charge of an electron, or the mass of a proton, among other constants, may shift. The problem with this potential shift is that it is theorized by major scientists that the universe is fine-tuned to support life as we know it today. If even one of these constants had been ever so slightly different, life would not have been possible. This is known as the fine-tuned universe hypothesis. For example, gravity relative to the initial cosmic expansion rate of the universe has a value of approximately 1. If gravity had been just a little stronger, the universe would have collapsed a long time before life would have been able to form. If gravity were a little too weak, no stars would have formed in the first place, and therefore no support for life. The ratio of the electromagnetic force to the gravitational force between a pair of protons is known as n. If n was slightly smaller, the universe would have been tiny and short-lived, unable to support any life whatsoever. If n were slightly bigger, protons would repel each other so violently that no large atoms would have been able to form. Likely, our universe would have only consisted of basic elements like hydrogen or helium. No carbon, iron or phosphorus, elements extremely important for advanced life. I could go on, but point is, the universe is fine-tuned to specifically support us today. If these values were to change, which, once again, we do not know if they actually do, it would spark the end for us. If one of these values, like the electromagnetic force, were to change, the bonds holding the stars, the chair you are sitting on right now, and the very DNA you are made of would simply dissolve and be pulled apart. Good news is that it would take an immensely long time before any significant change would occur. The rate of change in these constants would be so infinitesimally small, the big crumble would not take place for trillions of years. Long after the last stars have faded into black holes. In this time, the sky would have already turned pitch black and our beloved Earth would already have been destroyed. In the end, I will give this entry a 10 out of 10, an end to the universe that is absolute. However, when this happens, the universe will likely have already perished via another way, that being the heat death of the universe or some other cosmic doomsday event. So you need not worry. The constants holding us together and the fabric of the universe are here to stay and hold reality together for the time being. Ice 9 type transition. This entry is based on the scenario Kurt Vonnegut laid out in his fiction 1963 novel Cat's Cradle, where a substance is created by a scientist called Ice 9. Ice 9 is a polymorph of water and remains solid at temperatures of up to 45.8 degrees Celsius or 114.4 Fahrenheit, meaning it would not melt under any natural circumstances on Earth. In the novel itself, the project is abandoned as the consequences of letting this into the environment is quickly realized. Let's assume our scientists are a little reckless and let Ice 9 outside the lab. Due to something called seed crystallization, which is a real-world phenomenon, when Ice 9 comes into contact with regular water below the melting point, it would convert the regular water into more Ice 9, creating a chain reaction, eventually converting the Earth's ocean into Ice 9. Seems like there is a lot of chain reaction scenarios in this iceberg. Within a very short amount of time, all water on Earth will be frozen. Humans and animals will not be safe either, since humans are 60% water. When Ice 9 comes into contact with us, for example via the lips or eyes, it would enter our bloodstream and quite literally completely freeze us in place. All water would be rendered unavailable, which obviously makes all life on Earth, being primarily composed of liquid water, freeze-dried from the inside out. Those who somehow survive this carnage would dehydrate over time from the lack of fresh water being available. Unlike a regular ice age, which Earth is very much accustomed to, there would be no warming up from an ice age triggered by Ice 9. This ice is more stable and no natural processes could ever thaw it all out. All the humidity in the air itself would crystallize as well, raining down Ice 9 and leaving Earth a fully white, cold and dead sphere, unsustainable for any type of life. This sounds similar to Snowball Earth I covered in an entry way up the iceberg. While that would theoretically be survivable for humans living in subterranean bases, Ice 9 fully prevents any fresh water from thawing, leaving humans dying of dehydration. I'll give this entry a 10 out of 10, a grim scenario where Earth is barren, empty and in blizzard-like conditions, likely forever and never heating up again. Anoxic event. An anoxic event describes a period where large parts of the Earth's oceans were both toxic and euxinic. Euxinic is a fancy term describing a lack of oxygen and an abundance of sulfide. In short, there is little to no oxygen in the oceans, making the water very toxic and unable to support life. I'm not gonna get too deep into the details to not bore you, but in essence, the process starts with a massive spike of CO2 in the atmosphere, usually from increased volcanic activity, which slows down ocean circulation and prevents the mixing of oxygen-rich surface waters with the deep sea. At the same time, increased levels of CO2 cause the atmosphere to generally warm up since, as you may know, CO2 is a greenhouse gas. Therefore, the average temperature of the ocean's waters go up and they become less efficient at holding oxygen, leading to areas of the world's ocean almost fully depleted of all oxygen. This is not theoretical. These events are believed to have occurred in the past and have been linked to mass extinction events in Earth's history. In the current geological period, the average temperature of our ocean lies around 13 degrees Celsius or 55 degrees Fahrenheit, while during an anoxic event it rises to an average of 25 degrees Celsius or 77 degrees Fahrenheit. In this environment, life that has persisted there mostly perishes as they are unable to conform to the sharp rise in temperature, with lots of the marine life lying dead. It leaves a stage for bacteria to take over, which produce vast quantities of hydrogen sulfide, a gas that is highly toxic to almost all forms of life and would be spewed into the atmosphere over time. Hydrogen sulfide attacks the ozone layer, depleting it of its strength and leading to an increase of UV radiation from the sun, leading to DNA damage on remaining life on Earth. With oxygen levels depleted, chemical processes take place where previously sealed away metals like barium, aluminium, lead and more are now escaping and leaking into the oceans. Remaining marine life would die from metal poisoning. In the Permian-Triassic mass extinction event 252 million years ago, known as the Great Dying, very creative, nearly 96% of all marine life and 70% of all land animals died, partly due to anoxic oceans. Could this feasibly happen today though? British oceanologist and atmospheric scientist Andrew Watson wrote this about a potential anoxic toxic event occurring in the modern day. Quote, a full-scale OAE would take thousands of years to develop, but some of today's processes are reminiscent of those thought to have promoted OAEs in the distant past. Even today, the oceans are on the edge of anoxia. Every ocean basin has an oxygen minimum zone, OMZ, at a depth of a few hundred meters, where respiration consumes oxygen and depresses oxygen concentrations. Over large areas of the Eastern Pacific and the Northern Indian Ocean, oxygen levels in the OMZ are close to zero. In modern times, some OMZs have expanded, a process called ocean deoxygenation. In addition, nutrient input from rivers has led to eutrophication and local anoxia in many coastal regions. An example of these dead zones is the Gulf of Mexico near the Mississippi Delta, but there are now several hundred anoxic coastal regions worldwide. In short, it is very unlikely it will happen anytime soon, but it is bound to happen at some point, considering Earth's climate will naturally shift and warm up, causing the process I talked about earlier. So, I will give this entry a solid 8 out of 10. With current technology, we are unable to defend ourselves from the oceans turning toxic and the atmosphere damaged, but future human technology might be able to do so, considering it would take at least millions of years to occur, or at least already have colonized our solar system, ensuring the continued perseverance of humanity. But who knows? ZK class universe reset. Alright, this is some SCP stuff. Basically, in the SCP universe, there are different scenarios a particular SCP can trigger, so-called K scenarios. One of them is ZK, and there are a couple SCPs that trigger such a scenario. Since there isn't really a particular definition, I'll read out SCP-319's document, which seems to be one of the more popular tales I could find. So, here we go. Item number SCP-319. Object class Ether. Special containment procedures. SCP-319 is to be contained in place at Site-319 inside a hermetically sealed vacuum chamber many meters in diameter. The chamber housing SCP-319 must be insulated and the surface temperature controlled to prevent an absolutely uniform thermal gradient. 319 is to rest on a platform with an active mass damping system, and the relative position of the housing for each instance of 319-1 and the diameter and position of 319-2 shall be continually monitored by high-precision laser rangefinders. Any deviations in the position of any instance of 319-1 by greater than 0.01% or any change in size or position of 319-2 by greater than 0.01% is deemed a potential Götterdämmerung scenario and a risk of a ZK0 event. Foundation-wide initiation of Protocol Omega-319 is mandated in response to such an event until such time as the position of 319-1 are returned to optimal and 319-2 has ceased growth and movement. Any and all scientific investigation of 319, 319-1 and 319-2 is authorized only with explicit O5 approval. Description: 319 is a mechanical device constructed circa 1894, consisting primarily of 12 interlocking rings assembled in an 8-meter diameter spherical formation, allowing a clockwork mechanism driven by electric motors to rotate each ring separately on each axis. The purpose of the assembly appears to be the precise placement of 12 instances of 319-1 in relation to each other. The assembly has been frozen in its current configuration since its recovery, and current motion of instances of 319-1 have been almost solely due to tectonic disturbances and thermal expansion, contraction of the material comprising 319-1. 319-1 designates 12 anomalous mineral specimens mounted on 319. Each instance of 319-1 is nearly fully enclosed in a housing made of brass, copper, and glass, with a 12mm opening pointed at the center of 319-2. Each housing for 319-1 is connected to heavy-duty electrical cabling that loops in a closed circuit connecting each instance. Measurements indicate a constant 50 amperes of current in this circuit despite no connection to an outside power source. 319-2 designates a bubble of vacuum 2.561 meters across suspended inside 319. 319-2 appears to be in a lower energy state than the surrounding universe. Because of the alteration of physical constants within this bubble, any matter and energy entering this bubble is annihilated, as their quantum structures are incompatible. Current theory predicts that the existence of 319-2 should catalyze a vacuum metastability event, resulting in the the expansion of the boundary of 319.2 at the speed of light, bringing the vacuum state of the surrounding universe down to its lower energy state. The expansion of 319.2 appears to be held in check by the precise positioning of 319.1 around it. This is supported by the fact that any recorded movement of 319.1 allows 319.2 to grow by varying amounts. Over the past 50 years, vibration and thermal expansion have moved 319.1 enough to allow 319.2 to enlarge by 0. redacted meters in diameter, meaning that at its current rate of expansion, in redacted years containment, will fail as the outer boundary of 319.2 intersects the innermost ring of 319. So as you can tell, this is similar to the quantum vacuum decay entry earlier, and according to the SCP wiki, a ZK class scenario bends reality, sometimes breaking it entirely, though it does seem to be localized. So make up your own rating on this particular SCP entry. Let me know if you'd like to see more SCP content on my channel, and I might do a deeper dive on the fascinating SCP lore in the future. Kalki, reincarnation of Vishnu. Again, with these religious entries, I am trying to condense thousands of years of tradition and mysticism into a few minutes, and will have to leave out stuff, and be aware I might get stuff wrong. I will have to give a lot of context for this entry to make sense, but here we go. Kalki, also called Kalkeen, is the prophesied 10th and final incarnation of the Hindu god Vishnu. Vishnu is one of the major gods in Hinduism, known as the god of preservation and the protector of all good, and the enforcer of something called Dharma. Dharma is hard to explain, but it is a multifaceted idea of universal law, of peace, goodness and duty. In English, this is mostly translated as righteousness. Kalki is an avatar of Vishnu, and in Hinduism, an avatar means descent. You could think of it as God in human flesh. Kalki will appear at the very end of the Kali Yuga, the last of the 4 ages in the cycle of existence, known as Krita. Without getting too much into the whole concept, the Kali Yuga is the deepest, darkest age, where chaos, degeneracy and adharma, the opposite of dharma, rules. We are currently living in this age, and will continue to do so till the year 428,899 CE. Yes, the ages in Hinduism are quite long, with the whole cycle lasting around 4.3 million years. At the end of the Kali Yuga, Kalki will descend to the earth, born as a regular child. At a young age, he is taught holy scriptures and undergoes military training by another avatar of Vishnu. Kalki worships another god who gifts him a powerful white horse known as Devadatta, a powerful sword and a parrot that sees the past, present and future. Kalki will fight against evil armies in many wars, ending evil itself but not end existence, conquering them one by one with the help of immortal warriors. The deities hail Vishnu, invoking his Kalki avatar, quote, "When almost all the persons in the world will turn in the future to Mlekas, and when the wicked kings will oppress them right and left, thou wilt then incarnate thyself again as Kalki and redress all the grievances. We bow down to thy Kalki form, O Deva." Now, as far as I can tell, Hindu scriptures aren't very clear on what happens when Kalki descends and fights this evil. Like, we don't know if this is accompanied by large natural catastrophes that permanently alter the environment, or if it is akin to a large world war, toppling unrighteousness. It's purely speculative, but similar to Ragnarok I mentioned in an earlier tier, where the earth will likely be affected by this large global destruction, but immediately afterwards be restored to greatness, righteousness and virtue. Therefore, I will give this entry a 5 out of 10. Sure, adharma, unrighteousness and evil will be destroyed, but this will immediately be replaced by a fully righteous, pretty much divine world, though I'll leave it up for you to decide. Zoroastrianic prophecies. Once again, same warning like the previous entry, religious tradition, yada yada. In Zoroastrianism, a really old religion mainly practiced in Iran, Rashokereti will prevail, meaning something along the lines of making to the initial state or restoration. This is a term referring to the final renovation of the universe, when evil will be destroyed and everything will return back to be in perfect unity with God, Ahura Mazda. The premises are as follows. Good will eventually always prevail over evil. Creation and the world itself was initially perfect in every regard, but was corrupted by evil. The world will be ultimately restored to the perfection, and each human bears the responsibility for the fate of their own soul, and simultaneously shares this responsibility for the fate of the world. At some point, there will be a great battle between the forces of good, the Yazatas, which means something like the good powers under Ahura Mazda, or people devoted to the gods, and the Devas, which likely refers to the false gods or idols. By the way, don't confuse the Zoroastrian Devas with the Hinduist Devas, where they both come from the same root word, meaning god, which is where we get the English term deity or the Greek god Zeus. They are thematically completely opposed and don't have anything to do with each other. In any case, the Soshiant will descend to the earth. Think of a messiah, a sort of second coming, bringing forth the paradise on earth. He will resurrect all the dead for the upcoming final judgment. The Yazatas Aryaman and Atar will melt the metals in the hills and mountains, and this molten metal will flow like a river across the earth. All of mankind, both the living and the resurrected dead, will walk through this river. For believers of Ahura Mazda, this will feel like a river of warm milk, while the non-believers and wicked will burn. Mankind will then become spiritual beings, living without food, hunger or thirst, without any desires and without weapons, in eternal peace. Everyone will speak the same language and belong to a single nation without borders, sharing the same purpose and goal, joining with the divine for a perpetual existence in God's glory. This is very similar to the final days in other religions like the tribulation period in Christianity or the final judgment in the Muslim Qiyamah, and this is because these religions took heavy inspiration from Zoroastrianism, which is regarded as the oldest religion in the Middle East, where the first civilizations sprung into existence, so it is really no wonder why you can draw parallels like that. At any rate, I will give this entry the same rating as the previous about Kalki in Hinduism. It is hard to quantify who will perish and what exactly happens to Earth, but that does not really matter, as eternal goodness and perfection will prevail in the end anyways. 5 out of 10. Total existence failure. I first wanted to skip this entry because it seemed very vague and I had no idea what it's referring to. And luckily, the creator of this iceberg explained some of these entries in the Reddit thread itself they posted the iceberg under. According to the creator, this refers to a potential scenario where humanity finds a way to convert mass into 100% energy. As you may know, Einstein famously proved that energy itself is mass, and conversely, mass is energy. When humanity finds out a technology that allows mass to be converted to energy at high efficiency, perhaps close or exactly 100%, it would exceed the most advanced ways we currently produce energy, like nuclear fission or fusion, which converts mass at a minuscule fraction of that energy, something like 0.1%. This scenario suggests that when the first mass is converted this way, a self-sustaining cycle will be set off, where the energy released by the first few atoms provides the activation energy to trigger the conversion of all neighboring matter, therefore releasing more energy, activating the conversion of more matter, and so forth. This would create a conversion front, a bubble, similar to that of the quantum vacuum decay I explained in the previous part. Check it out if you haven't. 1 kilogram of any matter, whether it be feathers, your muscles, or plasma from the sun itself that is converted at 100% efficiency, would yield 9 times 10 to the power of 16 joules of energy, that is 90 petajoules. For reference, Castle Bravo, the biggest nuclear explosion detonated by the United States, yielded around 60 petajoules of energy. It would be equivalent of 21.5 megatons of TNT, or around 1,500 Hiroshima bombs. So imagine 1,500 Hiroshima nukes going off for each single kilogram of mass there is in your body, and then your house, and then your city, and the earth, and finally the universe. This is an unimaginable amount of energy, and the universe would quite literally be dissolved and transformed into a blinding flash of high energy rays and high temperatures in no time. Unlike a nuclear war, which leaves our planet somewhat intact, this scenario leaves only a void where an expanding sphere of pure light and radiation expands, swallowing anything in its path and converting everything into the purest form of energy. What then happens to the universe with everything converted? I don't know, but I can safely assume humanity cannot ever survive this. Perhaps it is not a good idea to seek out the most efficient way to harness energy, and let's stick to solar panels for now. 10 out of 10. The 9 billion names of God. Finally we're here, the very last entry, the finale of the Apocalypse Iceberg that has been going on for the past 3 months. The 9 billion names of God is a 1953 science fiction short story by British writer Arthur C. Clarke, who you have likely heard about. He was one of the co-writers for the script of 2001, A Space Odyssey. This short story was insanely popular and talked about Tibetan monks seeking out to list all the names of God. The name of God is very sacred, and people in history avoided referring to God directly. Quote, all the many names of the Supreme Being, God, Jehovah, Allah, and so on, they are only man-made labels, but somewhere among all the possible combinations of letters that can occur are what one may call the real names of God. The monks calculated the number of all possible names of God to be 9 billion, each having no more than 9 characters. Even when eliminating all nonsensical combinations, it would have taken them 15,000 years, so the monks rented a computer capable of printing all possible combinations and hired 2 Westerners to operate and install the computer. After 3 months of continuous work, the Westerners feared they would be blamed if nothing happened, so they left shortly before planned. They did, and when the final name is printed, they were on a mountain path on their way to the airfield. Under a clear night sky, they noticed that, quote, overhead, without any fuss, the stars were going out. The story ends here, abruptly, leaving the reader to wonder whether the prophecy was actually real, but assuming it is, the rest is up for your interpretation. All the stars in the night sky would go out one by one before Earth itself vanishes into nothingness, into the void, as God's wrath consumes everything. There's something deeply human about the tabooness of pronouncing God's real name, as it is often believed it would physically hurt God and incur his wrath. And, you know, I believe this is quite a nice way to end this iceberg on, breaking an unwritten taboo, and with no warning or foresight, Earth and the universe is destroyed, slowly, agonizingly slowly, with you to watch it with your own eyes. You realize someone made a grave mistake, not knowing what exactly had happened, but having a vague idea that someone betrayed God. And that was it, guys. Finally, I can let this iceberg rest. Next up, we will continue the Cold War iceberg, and maybe I will upload some shorter videos about interesting tidbits I found scouring the internet. In any case, it was a fun project, and I'm glad you guys enjoyed it as much as I did. Cheers!